Mobility is really the ability to do the things you want to be able to do with your body.
Do you have your native range of motion, and can you control that native range of motion?
How do we move with ease? How do we maintain flexibility as we age and address issues before they become injuries?
There are ways that you can change your environment so that these are just things you do without having to rely on willpower or motivation.
Today, we dive deep into all things mobility with two legends of movement, Kelly and Juliet Starrett. Dr. Kelly Starrett is a globally renowned physical therapist and strength coach, and his wife Juliet is a 3-time whitewater rafting world champion and CEO of the Ready State, which is the mobility coaching company they founded together. They've worked with some of the world's premier athletes as well as everyday average folks, and together they co-wrote the recently published Built to Move, which is this sort of holy text on all things movement.
Your range of motion doesn't have to change because you age.
We also talk about how to future-proof your body from injury and many other fascinating and important topics. Kelly and Juliet are just absolute wizards of pain-free movement and mobility. And look, we're only given one body in our lives. And this conversation really inspired me to take further ownership of my body. And I certainly hope it does the same for you. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Kelly and Juliet Starrett. This episode is brought to you by Roka.
I think there's still quite a bit of confusion around what mobility means and why people should care about it. And so I think that's one of the things we're trying to do in the world is continue to try to sort of clarify what that means, at least to us, and help people understand why they should care.
And I might just add that I've had to adopt a mantra. The glacial pace is the breakneck pace.
Yeah, I've heard you say that. I love that.
It is really difficult to change or to influence or to give people better tools and let it permeate. You know, at risk of sounding doom and gloom, you know, fitness has done a really good job of becoming very sophisticated. And there are great trusted resources, some of the people we talked earlier about, but maybe we've left a whole lot of people behind. And if it's starting to happen where we can have these kind of bigger conversations, then it's a reflection, I think, of people recognizing that maybe what we've been doing hasn't really served them as well as we thought. And that there's a big opportunity. There's, I think, a mismatch between the truth, and I think we really saw it in the pandemic of, you know, how are people able to self-soothe or take care of themselves or feed themselves? They didn't have kettlebells at home. They didn't know how to cook. And we just sort of left people behind. So it is gratifying very much. And I'm also sorry for popularizing the word mobility because I think it's like I invented the word core.
It's like the least sexy word ever. We're like, I can't believe we've had to say mobility this many times in our life.
Well, you were the first to really popularize it, and then it became part of the common, you know, vernacular. And you had to, it's so much so that you had to change the name of your company from Mobility Wood to the Ready State. But in looking at you know, kind of telescoping up and trying to understand what has happened, the way I see it is, yes, you kind of cut your teeth working with elite athletes, Olympic athletes, special forces, first responders, all these like kind of highly specialized people who are very performance oriented or who have like very specific goals that they're striving for. And through that process, you were able to not only help these people, but, you know, learn and get, you know, really, you know, into the deepest trenches of what this is all about. But then you can take that and through this book and now kind of what your current focus is to translate that for the mainstream audience. And I think that the time is really right for this for a couple reasons. The first of which is there's an explosion in interest in longevity. And certainly, you know, a core principle in trying to live you know, your longest, best life is your functional strength and mobility. Can you get up off the ground? You know, are you able to move? Are you able to put a bag in the, you know, above your head on the airplane and all that kind of stuff? And then also this sort of rising interest in rewilding our lives, right? This is something you talk about in the book and refer to quite regularly, that we have unwilded ourselves, right? And so the principles that you teach, although they're highly applicable to all of these elite scenarios, are more broadly applicable and more profoundly applicable, I think, to everybody who's thinking about, what's it going to be like when I turn 80, and how come I don't feel so good when all I do is stare at a screen all day and then go home and watch Netflix.
Well, I think we can even go a step further and say that in the last chunk of time where we've got to go in and see everyone's dirty laundry, people's lives are on the line or professions are on the line about how their body works, has really given us an indication of what are core essential practices off of which you can build elite performance. Because you understand that being a professional athlete is tricky. You have family and nutrition and travel and sleep, and there's a lot of, masters to serve in that world. And one of the things that we have come to realize is that if we could truly take sport and realize its potential, then sport was a laboratory through which we should transform society. And that's really been a lens, and one that we weren't, I don't think, really ready to adopt fully 10 years ago, but now we're realizing that that's our sort of our calling. And in so much that we're trying to get and take these lessons, that way sport can actually mean more to us. It can be a laboratory and a place, a teaching hospital, a test kitchen, where we can really understand what happens when people are under stress and all these different situations. And simultaneously, we saw that some of those basics get missed by the best in the world. They have blind spots. And then we find that a lot of people are confused about what a good foundational practice looks like. And we should be able to take those lessons and actually say, hey, look, we understand that you're not an elite athlete, but you're just a middle-aged dad who wants to stay up with his local mountain bike club. That's me. And what are the ways where I can do that in the context of my busy life so I don't have to, throw everything away? And I think that really is an opportunity for us to make sense of all of the, bright people working in this high performance world.
Yeah. And I would just add too that the other sort of lens through which we, I think, have evolved as humans over the last 10 years.
You mean us?
Together.
Yes.
Yeah. Both of us together. But, when we wrote Supple Leopard, we were really focused exactly like you said on, elite athletes and how to perform better and lift more weights and run faster. And that was really our focus, both as individuals and in terms of what message we wanted to put out into the world. But then we've spent the last 10 years raising kids in this like really quaint suburban neighborhood around busy professional parents who are not in the health and fitness business at all. So while we have this whole cohort of friends and professional colleagues who are, and they're all like us, optimizing their health and tracking everything and taking the right supplements and, trying whatever new exercise program is out. In contrast, we're also friends with a whole community of people who are, busy ad executives and attorneys and tech people. And maybe they never exercised, but what they share universally is they actually all really do care about their health, and they are interested in durability and longevity, but ultimately they're very confused about what to do, where to start. We've really become this node in our community where, people, anytime there's some new health thing out, people are like, should I be intermittent fasting? Wait, should I switch to keto? Should I do the Whole30? Should I try F45? Wait, should I do zone 2 cardio? How much should I lift? And we've just been this source of questions and seen the amount of confusion that just sort of everyday people who care about their health have. And there hasn't been sort of, we wanted to be able to say, hey, like how much should I sleep? Here's Built to Move.
Right.
How much should I take care of my body? Here's Built to Move. So it's really been this sort of 10-year evolution of, spending time in a community of people who really are focused on health and care about longevity and durability, but really have no blueprint at all.
Yeah, it really is a paradox. We've never had greater access to information, but there's this waterfall of inputs that ultimately do nothing beyond just paralyze us, right? Because we just don't know what to choose. Like this is something I'm experiencing right now with a lower back issue that I have. I'm sure we're going to get into that because I'm going to make it all about me. But yeah, you think about like morning routines or it's like, if you want to optimize, like optimization and all of that, it's like, I don't have 3 hours in the morning to like do my sauna and do my cold plunge and do my meditation and stare at the sunlight and then and then journal. And then I have to like all these things. It's like for the normal person, they're like, just can you just give me something that works within the construct of my life. I'm
Yeah,
not trying to
that's it.
optimize or be an elite athlete. I'm not going to join the SEALs, but like I just don't want to feel like crap. And it would be great if I had a little bit more energy to, when I get home from work and my kids are demanding my attention.
Yeah, and I think, your mention of your low back pain is also sort of a very important thing that I left out when I talked about those people in our community. I mean, what we see in that group are people who don't really care about having shredded abs, and they don't care about optimizing at all. But a lot of them are dealing with pain, and they, they aren't sure how to manage that and are worried that's going to become their identity. And in many cases, their sort of ongoing pain issues have taken them out of the things they love to do physically, which then, as you know, has all these downstream consequences, because so much of the community that many of us get revolves around some kind of physical activity,
or
whether
personal
it's hiking
identity,
or personal identity,
Sure.
or
I'm a biker.
you're a pickleball club or whatever it is you do. And so when people get sidelined from being able to do the things they love physically, it has all of these hardcore downstream consequences, especially in terms of their mental health. And so that's kind of the other piece we saw, is that, these people, again, they want to be out of pain, they want to feel good in their body, and they want to be able to, play a game of pickleball on the weekends with their friends. Like that's their goal. And I don't think in the health and fitness space have been speaking to those people. I think there's a bit of a change and a bit more of a focus on basics lately, coming in from our community. But I think, you're exactly right. Like they could care less about optimizing.
Right.
Sometimes we get to work in camps, and I was at a big camp for water polo at a big Division I university. And so all of the superstars are there, all the athletes, and then there's 100 teenagers there. And I ask, and I do this all the time, I'm like, how many people in here are pain-free? And you would think, you're a 15-year-old woman, like, can you have pain? And every hand doesn't go up. No one is pain-free. The reality is that this pain is really an experience that is human. And one of the things that I think is happening a little bit, which is great, is that we're shifting this narrative about who owns pain. Because what we said for a long time, especially in the athletic community, was pain is a medical problem. And that trickles down to, well, I don't have time to manage my pain, or my pain's not so bad that I can't do my job or live my life. So I'll just have this nagging thing until it gets so bad I can't occupy my role in the family, or do my, occupy my role in the team, or, if your back hurts so bad you can't go to work, that's a medical emergency. And so one of the things that we've been trying to shift is saying, hey, look, there's a whole lot we can do to empower people to be able to self-soothe without bourbon, without THC or ibuprofen or opiates, the way we literally handled it as a medical problem. We left people to become feral in managing their own pain. And I think as we are getting more complicated or more complex and sophisticated about this, one of the things we know is that pain doesn't mean injury. It doesn't even mean tissue trauma or damage. It's a request for change. So part of what we're trying to say in this book is, hey, we can try to treat pain and use it just as another metric. Like if you were stiff this morning because of your big workout yesterday, you're not thinking, you've got, you didn't contract rabies, you just are sore, right, from your run. And so if we can shift that narrative a little bit, and then also empower people that, hey, there's a whole lot they can do. And some of that is sleep, and some of that is nutrition, and some of that is down regulation. But a lot of it is, there's some inputs you can do that are really safe and really easy. And then we can have the next conversation, because maybe you don't want to go for a walk because your knee hurts.
One quick thing I will add, though, is that if you want to make all of my busy working mom friends like scream at the top of their lungs to the hills, it is tell them to do those things as a morning routine, and tell them that if they want to be healthy humans, like it literally, if you want to like make a bunch of like 45-year-old women real mad, it's that morning routine stuff.
Yeah.
Because they're like, I'm making breakfast and lunches for my kids and driving to the drop-off lane. And, what are you talking about? I should meditate for half an hour and journal. They go crazy. So, we haven't done a good job of speaking to that audience.
Well, even beyond that, and I'm speaking from personal experience as a time-crunched person who's interested in their fitness, I know, and who's dealing with some pain right now, I have all kinds of protocols and exercises and and all of them are like, kind of small little things, and, like just air squats and, that kind of stuff. A lot of the stuff that's in your book. And I still have a mental barrier to doing them, because like, I just want to go throw some weights around, or like get my workout in and feel like I got something done, and get to the studio and I can't be bothered. And that doesn't even like account for when you're like trying to be a competitive athlete and time crunched, where it's all about your fitness and your training, and the kind of stuff that you talk about in this book just feels indulgent, or something that you would do, if you had tons of time, which you don't, or if you're in a crisis situation, right? Which obviously has led me to this place that I'm in.
So, however you want to get there is reasonable and rational, right? I wait till it's crisis. That's I like a lot of pressure. I'm sort of a procrastinator, and Juliet
athletes with a high pain threshold.
There's also that too.
Yeah, they'll dig the hole deeper.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, so one of the things I think is really important that we have started to really wrap our heads around is this behavior modification, habit forming idea. And so Juliet points out that, we can't just give people lists of things. Hey, exercise more, eat more fruits and vegetables. Like that seems not to be working very well as it could. And so some of this, I think one of the things that I think is good in here, and we actually came up with this idea working with the Marine Aviation Weapons Tactical Group, was looking at, okay, you're very time crunched and you're underslept. We have 24 hours. Where are we going to fit these behaviors that don't also ask you to give something else up? How do we expand what it is you're doing, not take away? Because if you are coping with your family and stress and management because you need to go Peloton or run or deadlift, whatever it is, what we don't want to say is, hey, why don't you go to a balance class, or like that's you're not going to do
somewhere
that
and go to like a 1 hour balance class. You're like, no, I'm not doing that.
So also like be bad at it, and
also be bad at
it,
right? Yeah. So the real question is trying to look at what a 24-hour day time schedule is and say, where are the places where we have some agency and some control, and then we start to say, well, how can we constrain the environment a little bit so that you don't have to make another heroic, like, I'm going to get up off the couch now and juice or whatever it is that you're doing. People have a finite amount of will. How can we shape the environment so you can do the right thing automatically without having to make a heroic decision?
Yeah. I mean, that's very similar to the kind of things that Dan Buettner talks about with respect to the blue zones. It's sort of like looking at these cultures that have a long history of longevity and happiness and trying to deconstruct, how they've arrived in this place and then create a template for our modern world. And so much of it is about making that healthy choice or that healthy behavior the convenient and easy choice, as opposed to the burdensome,
the only choice
thing. Yeah. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
So Kelly was just, I think, as we told you, on a ski trip in Japan. And he had, for most of the trip, was sharing a room with another guy, and the guy got a cold, so they needed to separate rooms. And they got to the next hotel, and the hotel staff was kind of freaking out because they're like, well, we don't actually have an extra room. And when their guide actually pushed a little more and got some more information from the hotel staff, it turned out that they just didn't have like a Western room available. And by Western room, that means the bed is high up off the ground, and there's a normal, like an American-sized table, and the sink and shower are at our height. But they did have plenty of Japanese-style rooms where the bed is on the floor and the table's on the floor, and you shower sitting on the floor. And, but in their mind, they're like, well, this American guy can't handle this. And Kelly's like, I've been waiting for this my whole life.
This is the perfect.
Yeah, like Mr.
Me, choose me.
Choose me. But it is, Kelly took a video of this room, and I was like, man, we wouldn't all have so much trouble getting up and down off the floor if we got up and down off the floor to go to bed. And, even things like the, he showed me the video of the room, and even things like the air conditioning controls are like at that level, like knee level, because the presumption is you're going to be sort of, moving around on the ground. You're squatting on the ground, and that's where you're
around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
so your range of motion is not one more thing that you have to add in.
Yeah.
It's just built in.
Yeah. But we see in those blue zones, it's people aren't making a choice every single day to do these habits that are good for them. It's just, their environment is perfectly set up, so they aren't making choice. It's just what they do.
And there's inherent soft, less technical. I didn't take this turmeric and do this secret scroll program. I had to walk to the market, and I saw my neighbors. And so suddenly I feel like I live in a community, right? And there are all of these sort of loose connections. And one of the things that happens is that all of those behaviors start to stack. And I think that's one of the problems. We have experts. Matt Walker's book is great. And But sometimes you fail to kind of think about how, well, my non-exercise activity during the day, the number of steps actually makes me tired enough to actually fall asleep. And, I start making decisions about some of the things I'm going to do and put in my body, not put in my body, because it'll affect my sleep later on. And suddenly what we start to see is that, man, if we get people who are rested, they start to feel better and their pain starts to diminish, or their brain becomes less sensitive or easily sensitized or perceiving their body as a threat. And then we start to roll a little bit, and then you want to move a little bit more. You're a little bit more excited at 4:00 when you have a window of opportunity. So I think that's one of the magic pieces here is how do we construct a day-to-day that isn't crazy, that anyone can wrap their heads around, that also just begets these 1 + 1 = 3 moments.
Yeah, just nudging you gently in the right direction, repeatedly throughout the day, every single day.
And I'm like you, Rich. I want to suffer and breathe hard.
Yeah.
If I and I
it
often
doesn't count for shit.
Yeah, exactly. Like I feel like I have
right.
And Juliet can suffer.
I have 1 hour a
Yeah,
day.
I'm sure.
Real suffer.
Yeah.
I have like, let's say 1 hour in my time crunch schedule a day, and I'm always going to default to choosing to do some form of suffering. Whether that's a CrossFit workout or mountain biking or something like that. I'm always going to choose that. I'm never going to be the person who's like, I should probably take a recovery day, and instead I'm going to go to a yoga class. And I enjoy yoga, but I am never going to be someone who chooses going to yoga over doing a workout if I only can choose one. And so I'm in the same boat as you. In order for me to actually figure out ways to do some of these sort of range of motion mobility practices and practice things like balance, like it has to just be sort of like baked into other things I'm doing. Otherwise, I literally won't do it because I often feel like I really have that one sacred hour a day to do what I want. And what I want is workout.
We're brought to you today by Roka. Glasses are not something you normally think about as a piece of performance gear, which when you think about it is kind of insane because you can't perform at your best if you can't see. Well, the geniuses at Roka basically rebuilt eyewear from the ground up. No matter how active you are or how much you sweat, these things never slip or fall off your face. They're super durable, they look awesome, and they've got tons of super classy modern styles to choose from. I've been rocking Rokas for about 4 years at this point. I love them. I'm a big fan of the Hamilton style in gloss black. That's this frame right here, as well as clear, or I guess they call them vintage on the website. And if you want to try them out for yourself, you can do that right now and unlock 20% off your order with the code RICHROLL at roka.com. Or you can click the link in the description below. Okay, back to the show. You mentioned earlier that there's a lot of confusion around what you mean when you talk about mobility. So let's just clarify that. And I kind of want to build on that to get into the various, principles that form the framework of this book and your philosophy.
Well, I'll start and maybe Kelly,
take a swing at it.
Let's
Go,
take
girl.
a swing at this. I think.
At this point, you ought to be able to define it, right?
Yes. To us, mobility is really the ability to be able to move freely through your environment and do the things you want to be able to do with your body, whatever those things may be. Now, we offer a lot of tools, which we call mobilizations, which are things you can do to help improve your mobility and range of motion. But, to us at the highest level, it's the ability to move freely, ideally without pain, or at least minimizing pain, and be able to do the things you love to do.
And if I added
How did I do?
pretty good for an attorney. You've been in the game for a minute, I can tell. I would add your body. Everyone agrees that your shoulder should be able to do certain things and that your spine should be able to do certain things and your hips should be able to do certain things. Every physician, every orthopedic surgeon, every physical therapist, we all agree how much shoulder is normal, how much your ankle should be able to move. The problem is that we don't give people benchmarks for what is normative or what you should be able to do. And our lives sometimes don't ask us of that. And so suddenly when we have pain or a problem, that range of motion is never part of the conversation about, hey, I see that your steering wheel doesn't go all the way to the left. Let's just make sure that you can, the pilots, before they take off, they check to make sure everything's working right. So we could also define mobility as, do you have your native range of motion and can you control that native range of motion? So are you a skilled person? And what Juliet said is all of that is important, but really what is it you want to do in your world and environment, and how do you want to express this body? That's the most important thing. And I think that's where we got in the weeds. Hip range of motion is important. Yeah. But if it prevents you from doing something, or you're having pain, and that's also conjoined with the fact that you don't have access to that range, maybe that's the reason you should care.
Well, and let me just give you one example. Like, if you just asked anyone on the street, like, do you care about your hip range of motion? They're going to be like, no, why would I care about that? But as an example, we were recently talking to a friend of ours who has a 4-month-old baby and has both sets of parents visiting, and his parents are like in their mid-60s. So, not that much older than us. And his mother is able to get up and down off the ground and sit with the baby, but his mother-in-law can't get down onto the ground or up off of the ground, and so can't sit on the floor and play with the grandchild. And that's one of those things that you don't think about until it's like a use it or lose it kind of thing. But like, that right there is hip range of motion. So you may not care athletically about hip range of motion because you're not trying to run faster or lift more weights, or, whatever an athlete might need to care about hip range of motion for. But, most people would say, man, do you want to be able to sit on the floor and play with your grandchild when you have one? And they'd be like, yes, I do. And so, that's one of the reasons why people should care about their hip range of motion.
Right. I feel that humans are not very good at casting their gaze that far into the future, though.
So true.
Especially like, it's not
if
until
you're 25.
You have, like if you're 20, you're just like, I'll deal with that when I can.
Do you remember
that's not going to happen to me.
Yes.
Especially with an elite athlete, like, forget about it. Right. So the barrier to being able to, convince somebody that these things are important has to be, it's like a high bar for you, right? To like communicate with people.
That's right.
Like, hey, we can talk about longevity. How long do you want to live? What is it that you want to be able to do when you're 80 and 90, et cetera? But when you're 30, even in your 40s, and you're essentially pain-free, or you don't have some kind of injury, that's a challenge. Like, it is true that, like, whether it's heart disease, diabetes, any kind of brain degeneration, similarly with our physical bodies, like, these things are progressive. And if you're not working on this stuff far in advance of those aging years, you're going to have a problem. But if you do undergo, sort of shoulder the responsibility of doing these things that you guys talk about so much, you're taking out this insurance policy to be able to do all those things in your later years. But it's just that humans are not good at evaluating the cost-benefit analysis of these sorts of things.
And our environment gives us a lot of cues or guides us into poor decisions. I think New York Times had an article just recently about how some of our foods hijack our brain chemistry, right? Our modern foods, these umamis, we just think, oh, they're so good. So here's a story. I was a young physio student watching the cardiac catheter lab, and I'm watching a really wealthy man in San Francisco, and his whole family's outside, and he has 3 beautiful daughters, which I can start to like put myself in his shoes. He has this amazing wife, killer law practice. He's rich in every definition of the term. He's one life, and he's in there having 3 stents put in his heart, and he's overweight. And what I thought in that moment was, if this guy has every resource and every reason to live, and it's still that hard to change and to make these things to keep himself alive with his family, what recourse does an average person, mortal person without his resources have? And really, that was a kind of a shocker. And I think if I'd videoed the 2 women, putting in the catheter, like chain smoking, like as a matter of fact, that may have showed him that video. Maybe that would have changed his behavior. But, it's really difficult to sort of untangle what seems like the biggest Gordian knot in your life. Where do I go? Especially since sometimes we don't see the results right away.
Yeah. So when talking about mobility and movement, how do you diagnose somebody's mobility? Like, everybody, you guys have like this superpower. You can like look at somebody just sitting or standing or walking and be like, oh, I see 10 things wrong with like what's happening there. Like, most people don't have that ability and don't think about that kind of stuff. The average person, if they're pain-free, is going to say, well, this is not good enough. I can walk and I can get up and sit down and all that kind of stuff. So where does one begin to try to self-diagnose and understand their own mobility capacity limitations and what they should be focused on working on?
Well, in this book, we literally identify 5 areas where we think that if people just kept an eye on it,
A vital sign.
We call them vital signs
Right,
because
you have these 10 things.
Yeah, we have these 10 vital signs, but we specifically chose the word vital sign because it started coming up more and more in the pandemic. Actually, everyone was like tracking all these vital signs, like their SaO2. And, obviously everybody knows that 120/80 is like okay blood pressure. And if you go over that, it's something you should keep an eye on. And so that's why we thought, well, if regular people can keep an eye on a vital sign like blood pressure, then why can't there be some movement specific or health specific vital signs? And so, obviously the human body is the most complicated thing in the known universe. But we really tried to boil it down to a few areas of range of motion we thought people should keep an eye on or that we consider to be vital signs. And we do have these simple tests in the book that people can just do once and sort of say, okay, this is where I'm at. This is something I need to keep an eye on. This is something I'm doing great at. And then the things we suggest for people to work on them, we've suggested, things that they can literally do like while they're watching Netflix at night or while they're still sitting at their office. Like we've really tried to make it so that you don't have to go to the 1 hour mobility balance class and, journal in the morning in order to get these things done. But I think they're just some simple tests. I think if everybody had a real baseline of what their range of motion was in their big movers, their hips, their shoulders, their ankles, and just literally kept an eye on it.
Turns out everyone has a universal language. Running. Everyone knows. When I say run, everyone knows exactly what I mean, right? This is why the running community is global. If we use yoga as a movement language, everyone has probably done yoga a little bit. Everyone knows what chaturanga and downward dog is. So we have some touch tones of movement that we can all agree on. If I say push-up, everyone knows what a push-up is. But what's nice about that is we now have this formal language of diagnostic movement that everyone has heard of or at least been exposed to. And it's not the language of rehab. I think rehab gets confusing. There's so many ways to restore position or help to activate or normalize. And that is like, hey, I speak Esperanto, but I speak classic Greek, and but this training language is pretty ubiquitous. And one of the things that Juliet pointed out was when we can make some of these diagnostics in that normative language of squatting up and down, standing on one leg, suddenly, can you get into this position and squeeze your butt? Suddenly we have a universal language that reflects the movements that we do. If I say lunge, usually everyone knows what a lunge looks like, or if a push-up looks like, or putting your arms over your head. So that, I think, is a way where we can begin to cast a bigger net and have people come into understanding what it is maybe that they're limiting or what we're having struggle with. And we set some booby traps in this book. It's pretty shocking. We were hanging out with one of our super strong, badass athlete friends who struggled to get up off the ground. Yeah. And then he was like, whoa, my hips. And I was like, oh, your hips tight? Like, I didn't know. And I think when we kind of confront people with tests and that we think are very reasonable because we've got to see the world a little bit and they're confronted with it, then they are knowing, hey, maybe that's something I need to work on. And I think, again, creating that vital sign line helps people to make decisions once they know they above or below.
Right. So early in the book, you have this test. It's like, okay, let's see what's up. Like cross your legs, lower yourself down into a cross-legged position, and now, try to stand up without using your hands or, kind of using the side of your legs to I'll do it. And I was able to do it, but it was harder than I thought it would be. My back kind of hurt.
You're Rich Roll. You're like, come on.
You're like a legend, Rich.
Well, here's the thing, and this is kind of like what I wanted to get into, which is just because if you're an elite athlete or super fit, these are not necessarily predictors of whether you have great range of motion or mobility. And in fact, it could be quite the opposite because you're so specialized at a certain subset of activities that it makes you kind of brittle in terms of being like a robust overall, mobile, functional, flexible athlete. I mean, Kelly, I know you grew up in Europe and were exposed to all different kinds of sports and became this generalist, and that was sort of the root of all of the work that you've done since, and appreciating the importance of having a robust battery of different kinds of activities that you do as an athlete. But elite athletes are just good at one thing, right? And so actually that makes them kind of fragile in the context of
potentially,
overall, like, kind of stability, mobility, et cetera.
And how do you, in an elite population, what are our minimums? And we can, for the people who are nerding out on this deep, if I'm an elite sprinter, so Stuart McMillan of Altus Track and Field,
I know,
Stu.
Yeah. I've never met him, but like on Twitter, I love like his feed and like all this.
Shout out to, he's one of the greatest coaches I've ever met.
Yeah.
But Stu and I got into this conversation about how much dorsiflexion, ankle range of motion, his elite sprinters needed, right? Where he's coaching Andre DeGrasse, like pretty good sprinter. Mm-hmm. And he's like, my sprinters only need 0. They need 0 degrees. And I was like, totally agree. That's how much they need to do their sport. But does he need more range of motion in his hips and ankles to go downstairs? And he was like, ooh, wait, what? And then I was like, does he train? Do you go to the weight room? Do you need more than some ankle range of motion, 0 ankle range of motion to perform the training? So what we can start to say is, do you have enough range of motion? And as a coach, I want to make sure you have enough range of motion so that you don't kind of create alternative strategies to solving movement problems. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the problems with being a human being is we're so robust for a long time until something changes or we can't get away with a strategy that worked for us. You may even be the best in the world at using this strategy, but that strategy doesn't actually hint at the possibility or total possibility of your physiology. Mm-hmm. That if we improved your hip extension, your ability to get your knee behind your butt effectively, we actually can make you more efficient, more effective, and potentially solve or prevent weird tweaks in the system like your low back pain or your knee pain. So on the one hand, with those athletes, we want to give credence to, hey, your job is to do this sport. What are the minimums so that we don't end up creating? And sometimes we have to use pain as a diagnostic. Oh, you're starting to get achy. Let's keep an eye on that. Mm-hmm. But for the rest of us, we have an opportunity to create a little bit more robust platform of generalism, right? And one of our tests with all of our athletes, we're like, oh, you think you're a good athlete? Jump into a yoga class. Let us know how you do there. Can you stand on one foot and breathe? Oh, you couldn't. Oh, maybe your elite program isn't so elite. You can't even do downward dog and take a breath. So
we've been like totally against sports specialization for kids, and we've been like really trying hard not to have our own kids become specialists. They both play water polo. And we sent them this winter in Tahoe to a Pilates class, and they were destroyed for like 4 days. And these are kids who, are training all the time. So, we're trying to, this isn't really related to your question, but, we are always like, hey, if you think your program is so great, like go try someone else's program.
Yeah.
If you love CrossFit, go do some other program and see how you fare, right? Especially if you're not an elite athlete. Obviously, elite athletes need to get so specialized and they have to, I think, leave a lot of things behind, right? If you look at elite cyclists, it's like, well, they have 0 upper body strength on purpose. But, for the rest of us, it's like, hey, we should all, become generalists and at least try some of these other things, including our own kids.
It is crazy how untransferable some of that, like, real specialized fitness can be. Like if you're a Tour de France cyclist, you're so like, you have 0 upper body strength or whatever, like you're so adapted and efficient at doing this one thing. But the minute you take that person and put them into some other kind of environment, they're hapless, right? And there isn't like a robustness to all of that. And look, you have to do that to be at the highest level of that sport. And, any athlete who's trying to be an elite in their specific thing is going to get really good and efficient at that one thing. But there's going to be atrophies of other muscle groups and all kinds of other, sort of downstream byproducts of that specialization that create physical workarounds, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I'm just as somebody who, I love the fact that you've worked with swimmers. I come from a swimming background and then did this triathlon thing and, got very efficient at that one thing, but became like really not overall like all that stable. Like I used to be really flexible as a swimmer and I had great balance in yoga and all that. And like a lot of that, like now when I try to do that, I'm like, wow, like I'm like kind of messed up. Like I have a lot of work to do. And now I've got this back pain and everyone's telling me I got to get my glutes to fire. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. Like,
what does that mean?
I know.
Yeah.
You need to hire
that's like
people
one of those
to walk around
internet.
and
That's like one of those
squeeze your glutes.
internet things that people say. You're like, get your glutes to fire.
In
You're
fairness,
like, what does that mean?
I have consulted with lots of bright people who've given me great advice, and there's and it's been beneficial to me. But there also is that paralysis too, where it's like, You have conventional Western medicine people telling me like, you 100% need surgery. And then a whole battery of, alternative modalities and practitioners, all of which are really great people who've given me a lot of tools. But also it's sort of like, there's so much, like, I just don't quite know what to do. I don't even know. That wasn't a question. I just threw a ton at you about a whole bunch of different stuff. But anyway.
If we pull that apart, the first thing is, I think we have confused people about what is a health practice. And so I think we can actually take exercise out of it. If you have any 90-year-olds or 100-year-olds in your family, and a lot of people listening do, how fit and jacked are they? They probably came of of age in a generation where they did not, but they were doing something. Good genetics plus some behaviors, good relationships. They eat. They
moved a ton.
Mm-hmm. They were always moving. I just saw a world record set in the 5K by that 90-year-old woman. Did you see that?
I did. Yeah.
I was like, she can outrun me. She's amazing. So one of the things we can do is help to pull that apart, because I think what we said was, as long as you could just crush it on the Peloton, you're good. Right. And it was easy to measure that cardiorespiratory fitness, cardiometabolic fitness, and get a wattage, but it doesn't speak to all the wonders and ranges. So if you look at something like Joseph Pilates and what he was trying to solve, you can really see genius in his methodology and system. If you jump into any yoga class, there are positions that are foundational to the function of the human. And that's why yoga will persist forever. Can you get into this end range position where you don't have a lot of control? Can you breathe and stabilize there? I mean, that is just a practice that you could do forever, layer on to anyone. And any of my athletes ask me, I'm like, yeah, do yoga. Whenever you want to do it, it's one of those all you can eat buffets. One of the things that we see then is, if we sold that, in the season, we have this kind of competitive time, sports specialization training, sports specific training. And the only goal is to make you a better triathlete. That's the season. But we come out of the season and we're into general physical preparedness, where we can start to open up a little bit and say, hey, I see that the session cost or the sport cost caused you to specialize or miss some ranges. And that's what we're not typically doing with a lot of seasons, especially as we go year round. And our kids, you said we used to play all these different sports. We used to allow the different exposure to these positions and shapes and different things account for all of the possibility and variability. And as that play has gone diminished, as the amount of exposure has become diminished, we're realizing we're having to teach a lot of formal movement skills to kids and really good athletes because they didn't have it as a child. So in season, there's only one goal: to win. And we're gonna burn everything we need to do on the bonfire of winning and keep you in the game and minimize. And the second the season's over, we start to expand that a little bit.
That makes sense.
And that's an easier way to wrap your head around it, to say it's okay that you became hyper specialized, but we didn't have the tools and didn't prepare you to say, okay, now I'm out of season. What's essential to make me robust again?
And I would say too that just in the broader community, and I see this a lot with parents of kids I know that are doing athletics, is I can't tell you how many times a parent has asked me, well, I really want to get my kid into a mountain bike specific strength and conditioning program. Or what
that's called mountain biking.
Secret strength and conditioning programs should my kid who swims be doing? And, our response to that is always like, well, they need to do general physical preparedness. Like, every kid probably could stand to practice balance and get more agile and get a little bit stronger and, work on their motor control and stability, coordination. I think every kid and adult could stand to do all of those things. But I do think this whole idea of, if I'm a specialized athlete, then everything I need to do is specialized. It's like, it's become part of our psyche.
Yoga, kettlebell, hill sprints, that's a pretty vicious combination.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to go a long way like that.
How many Tour de France cyclists do you have like doing kettlebell workouts?
Well,
a lot of them
during the season.
Yes.
During the season, though, not as much.
One of the things that I think is amazing, and you know this, you've run into and worked with so many mutants. Peter Sagan could be a world champion in multiple sports. I think he's that talented an athlete.
He's brilliant
a beast.
at what he does.
Levi Leipheimer is a very good family friend for a long time. He grew up ski racing. He's a really good athlete. And sometimes I think it's easy to pull the athleticism out. If you look at, the best athletes in the world, they were always good athletes in athletics. They didn't necessarily just, I do this one little thing. So, what we're finding though is if you want to win, you have to be durable. And suddenly durability comes in the form of some really simple strength training. How much strength training in season? Enough not to ruin your surfing, not enough not to ruin your sport, enough that one of the things we're always asked to do is we come in and, can you help us untangle this? We want to make it through the season longer. And we have to look at all of the pieces. Tell me about your sleep. Oh, my sleep is wretched. Okay, it's really hard for us to understand what's going on. One time we're working with a CrossFit Games champion who was having this really weird knee pain. And, my friends are brilliant coaches and I'm not bad. And we were talking about all things. Ultimately, she was traveling alone without her partner and she slept with the TV on at night because it made her feel safe in the room. But that TV on all night long kind of messed up her sleep a little bit, right? She didn't actually recover. And that was what made her brain start to perceive her knee as a problem. So it's important that we're looking at all of the features that kind of go into making a robust person. And sometimes it is fueling, believe it or not. And sometimes it is, you don't have any range of motion here. And some of it is, you're not even, strong in this position. So that's why I think these single approaches don't necessarily work. We always have to take a systems approach.
Yeah. And in the book, you have these 10 vital signs. You go through them chapter by chapter. That begins with, sort of getting up. How do you get up off the ground? I mean, it's like basic stuff, right? But then it's like hip extension.
But
like
to you nailed it,
right? Go ahead.
No, just that. But if I grab someone off the street and say, I got $20 if you can do this, you'd be shocked at how we have set, the bar has gotten away from us and has gotten very low.
Right. And in addressing that, like back to the whole, like we've become unwilded and we need to rewild ourselves. This conversation often is rather binary. And I'm thinking about my friend Tony Riddle. I don't know if you know who Tony is. Do you know who Tony is? Like the natural, he's this guy in the UK. And he was a strength coach and had a gym and, had this lifestyle and had a sort of an existential crisis. And now he's kind of like this rewilding expert who has broken some amazing records in barefoot running. Like he runs barefoot all over the UK and holds these retreats and has kids, but he's taken all the furniture out of his house and there's no chairs and like it's all like, Japanese in the, you're crouching and you're squatting and it's all, this kind of movement and breath work and a lot of the things that you talk about. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is that it's rather extreme. Like you need the extremes as an example. Like here's a guy who's really doing it, but for most people, the moms in your neighborhood or whatever, they're not going to like get rid of the chairs in their house, right? So it's like, I see you guys like in the middle as a translator of what works and, the principles behind kind of what Tony's doing, but translating it in a way that is accessible for like the person who lives in the world.
I mean, you're exactly right. Like nobody in our neighborhood is going to get rid of their living room couch and, furniture in order to have a
mid-century modern couch, no way.
Yeah, there's like no way anybody's doing that. I agree with you. But yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right. I mean, I think we're trying to really come at this from like the most reasonable place we can, which are, what are the things that you can do that can also exist within your normal environment. Like we have a couch and chairs in our living room, but we happen to have some mats in our living room that you can sit on so we can sit on the floor and be comfortable as well. And so we're just trying to really strike that balance all the time by saying, hey, it is important to take care of your body. We believe in rewilding the body. Like we're total fans of anything related to rewilding, but it's also got to fit within the context of people's lives. I mean, I think, the
inconsistency,
the third rail in this book, of course, is food because everybody, the food thing is so charged and such a part of people's identity. But one of the things that people I know don't want to do is they're like, well, I'm not going to follow anything that is not going to allow me to go out to dinner with my friends every so often on the weekends. If I have to follow a diet that means I can't enjoy a community meal with my friends, like I'm out, right? And so many of the diets and suggestions people have mean they can't eat dinner with their kids or they can't go out to dinner on the weekends with their friends. And, for most people, that trade-off and loss of community and connection just isn't worth it from a health standpoint. And so, we really tried to think about like, what can people actually do within the context of like being a regular person who wants to like be a normal part of society and not totally on the fringes.
Juliet has she is into nutrition, has done some nutrition coaching and like some studying nutrition through precision nutrition. I hate that stuff. It just doesn't speak to me, and I see all the third rail opportunities, like the cuts on the internet I'm going to get if I say something.
Careful.
Get ready, Kels.
Yeah.
But I had to back into it because we had to talk about the health of your tissues, and we had to talk about your healing properties. And I deal with people who are injured. Oftentimes there's two cohorts of people who come and see us professionally at the high level. I used to win. I'm not winning anymore. Why am I winning? Help me. I got injured winning, and I don't want to be injured because it's keeping me from winning. And it turns out micronutrients are hugely important to your healing and your body. And when I mean micronutrients, I'm about vitamins and minerals. And what is the revolution in performance nutrition? Food. That's what we're now back in. Alan Lim, Stacy Sims, hey, are you eating fruits and vegetables? Yes or no, 1 or 0? Because that no shade on a 900 calorie cup of coffee, but there's no micronutrients in that fat MCT bomb that you're having. It's not actually, it's a fuel, but it's not a vitamin source.
There's no nourishment.
There's no nourishment.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to try to get you to use all this collagen you're taking, you better have some vitamin C on board. Well, where does vitamin C come from? Am I just taking more pills and eating this ground bison? Is that my recipe for the future? And so what we've tried to do here around the nutrition piece, because we had to in our work to be able to talk about keeping muscle mass on or leaning out or body composition or just having what you need on board. And it turns out people don't eat enough fruits and vegetables, period, anywhere. And especially kids. Shocker. Right? And so we could start there. And what we try to do is cast this net saying, you're a vegetarian? Cool, I respect that. But let's make sure you're getting some protein and you're actually getting fruits and vegetables as a vegetarian. You're vegan? Cool, we respect that. You're carnivore? Cool. You can eat these berries with your raw liver, whatever that is that you need to do to be you and identify. But there are these certain metrics and baselines, principles that underpin that give you a lot of freedom. And we do think that people are smart enough to make the decisions, but then you can start to say, wow, I thought I was eating a great way, but we just saw that study that came out that most kids aren't eating any fruits. Most kids 56% of kids aren't eating vegetables. Like that may be a long-term problem for us as a society.
I think it's pretty certain to be a long-term problem. It already is a long-term problem.
That's right.
We're reaping it right now when you look at the incidence of obesity and type 2 diabetes and pre-diabetes and metabolic health is kind of a core piece in your nutrition chapter, like having metabolic flexibility and all of that. Like that's a newer conversation where there's a lot of emergent science coming out. So I'm super interested in looking at that. And perhaps that's a way into talking a little bit about the wearable technology. Like you've got I assume those are Oura rings that you got on. I got the Whoop on. And that's another piece when it comes to the suburban moms or like the average person. We're now in a situation where we have all these data points. Like we can look at like, oh, my sleep stages and my HRV and my resting heart rate and my metabolic rate and my skin temperature. But it's like, what do I do with that? Yeah. How do I interpret this? What's important about this?
Do I have a second glass of wine or not based on that, right?
And with, the kind of continuous glucose monitors also, like monitoring, glucose intake and how to make sense of that. I think there's a lot of risk of people leaping to conclusions with these data points and then making poorly informed decisions about nutrition, et cetera, because they don't understand the complexity and the nuance of what all these data points are trying to tell them, setting aside also, just the accuracy of all of these things, which I think, you can't rely on, too much.
No, I mean, I'm often wearing more than one tracking. So, between the two of us, Kelly does really enjoy this Oura ring, but he hates wearables and tracking as a general rule. He's not into it. And I, on the other hand, am a total nerd and I love like tracking everything and seeing everything. But I think over my own life of having every single possible wearable and tracking every possible piece of data, for me, when push comes to shove, the only one that really matters and is really actionable for me is my step count, which I literally could get from like a $5 pedometer that was made in the 60s.
You already have one on your phone.
And I already have that on my phone. You're exactly right. I could be wearing a Garmin and an Oura ring and do a workout and it would track completely different calories and, different metrics and I would get different sleep scores and my heart rate variability would show up as different on each one. So, I sort of enjoy seeing at a high level, how my sleep looks on my Oura Ring. That's really what I use that for.
We recognize that people are unique in your tolerances and your history and all the things going on. So you get to, we run at this always as, here's what most people are going to experience. Drinking alcohol before you go to bed typically will impact your sleep. So that doesn't mean we don't drink alcohol. That just means we make it now an informed decision about alcohol related to sleep. That, hey, I'm with friends. There's an amazing bottle of wine out. I haven't had a margarita in a long time. It's hot. I'm going to have a margarita. But I know the trade-off is here. And I think that helps us to make informed decisions about some of these behaviors. Let me tell a story about our friend who works with Whoop, Kate Courtney. I don't know if you've met Kate.
I haven't met her, but I know who she is. We have the same managers.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So Kate Courtney is one of the greatest American mountain bikers, cyclists ever. She's a world champion. She's a superstar and one of the most complete athletes I've ever met. Just really pays attention and is thoughtful about details. She's racing for the world championship title, her first world championship. And she wakes up and her Whoop says, poor recovery. And she's like, nope, it's wrong.
She has like a 12, it's red.
And she's like, no way. I feel great. I'm going to win today. And so she just ignores it. And she goes off and wins and then calls up Whoop and is like, hey, your algorithm's off. And they're like, we're Whoop, we're not off. And then they were like, you're right, we were off. And she got this weird data telling her to ignore how she felt, right? And again, instead of taking that piece of information and saying, how does this integrate into my behavior and my understanding of how I feel myself and trusting that because she's done that and she's so capable of it, she could have said, oh, my device is telling me not to race today. But here we have such an incredible athlete who's done an amazing job of understanding herself, controlling what she can control, setting the parameters to win, that she was like, oh, that data doesn't make sense with the whole. And I think that's amazing. And simultaneously, we have people who come in with chronic pain and persistent pain. And the first thing I ask them is, how much are you walking? And tell me about your sleep. Those are the first two questions about anything that's going on. And, one of the things they're like, I sleep great. I'm like, great, prove it. So what gets measured gets managed, right?
Yeah. No, I think, what I take from what you just shared and what I agree with is that these are tools and they are powerful tools if you have the right relationship with them. Like you have to look at trends over time and not get too caught up in individual data points because, like maybe the thing flips up or like, you don't know how so it's like, and look, I love my Whoop. I leave it on and they're a great sponsor of the show and all of that. And I get a lot of value in it. And I think on the sleep piece, one thing I've learned, and it was interesting, you talked about this in the book, like, you realize that if you're trying to get 8 hours of sleep, like you better be in bed for like 9 hours.
I mean, I was
because you're not actually asleep the whole time that you think you're asleep.
No, I was actually going to say that when Kelly was talking. I mean, that's the other like key learning that this, one of these tools have given us is that we really had no idea until we started tracking that the average person is losing a whole hour of sleep. I think Matt Walker talks about that in his book as well. But, between Matt Walker's book and actually seeing it in real life, realizing that, going to bed at 10 and waking up at 6 is not 8 hours of sleep. Right. That's 7 hours of sleep. That was a big revelation for us. And these tools are what helped us get that. So I'm with you. I mean, I think they're tools. And I think if you don't, as long as they're not dictating how you feel, which I think actually can happen, but as long as they're not dictating how you feel and you have a good relationship with them, then they're great.
And they also have to fit in, early on, I became sort of mini obsessed with HRV when it was just new. And there was
it's complicated.
It is. And there was an HRV device that came out.
Can I tell the story?
Oh, please.
Yeah.
Okay. So we get like an early HRV.
This is what it's like to be married to me.
This is probably 2012. Like you probably got one of these. I don't even know what company it was. But in order to track his HRV, he had to get up and be up for 15 minutes, but then he had to go back and lay down and put all these nodes all over his body and then lay there for 20 minutes.
This sounds like a Tim Ferriss thing.
And and meanwhile, at this point, our kids are like, 7 and 4, and they're awake and like we're trying to get them ready for school and make breakfast and make lunches.
And I was training for the Molokai.
And
so I was like, I am an elite middle-aged dad who's going to slay this. I need this information.
And I finally, after like 4 days, I was like, dude, like this whole thing we're doing in the morning, like you need to be present, helping with this kid thing.
We had
You
funny,
can't-
and I'd be like, "You just ruined it. Now I have to lay
do
here
it over
longer."
again.
And there goes. So anyway, we got in this whole battle about, because he had to go, and so obviously that wasn't sustainable, and the technology has gotten so much better since then. But that was where we started.
But what is important to understand about heart rate variability? Like all I know is that, okay, when it's low, like that's not good and you should chill out. And when it's high, like, okay, you have a green
You're winning
light
at life.
to like push it.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a really great use of it. I suspect you are a very durable person, and then I could throw a lot of stress at you, and you can swallow that down and kind of normalize the next day. That would be my guess based on your
You
past.
might be surprised. You might be surprised.
You could suffer through.
Yeah.
We're not experts in heart rate variability. It's another piece of the equation.
Yeah.
We're trying to understand inputs and outputs, and where can we help people understand why they may not be recovering or feeling as good, even though they feel like they're doing the thing. So, one of the things that statement that we have is we're like, the bigger the engine, the bigger the brakes. You need if you're an executive person, you're, working hard, you're an athlete, you're a working single mother, you need to have a set of tools to be able to hit the brakes at the end of the night. I think it's like the moto people are like, you're either wide open on the gas or you're on the brakes and the back wheel is locked up as you're sliding. And I think we're really good at opening the gas now. And if you look at so much of what happened in the last 10 years before we've kind of gotten into sauna and cold and down regulation, it was all about how do we wake up and go.
Yeah.
And then you get to the end of the day and you don't know how to calm down. This came to view when a few years ago we had a friend who got a blood panel and it freaked her out because said she was pre-diabetic. And some of her liver markers were off. And so the first thing we said was, well, tell us about your day. Are you under stress? I mean, like, we need to know a little bit about you, not just show me how many macros you counted. And she said, well, I'm under a lot of stress. And we were like, how do you cope with that stress? And she said, well, I usually drink some wine before bed. Okay, great. So tell us about that. We're curious. And she's like, well, it's sometimes it's 2 bottles of wine. And that, if I just walked in and was like, well, you're crazy. No wonder you can't drink 2 bottles of wine. If I take her only strategy of self-coping and not understand that's the tool she was given, and that's what she discovered on her own, then shame on me. I'm a really terrible performance coach. And I think that's where we started to really understand this notion of trying to look at stress and how people are coping with their stress so they can hit the brakes in their own home at that hyper local. You don't have to go somewhere. You don't have to hire an expert. You should be able to self-soothe in the evening. And heart rate variability is just one of those pieces, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think also one of the things Kelly and I have really tried to pay attention to, and I think it took turning 40 for us to have the maturity to do this, because we both do like to bleed through our eyes and suffer in training. But that is, the question we ask ourselves a lot is, do we have a desire to train? And then we actually try to listen to that, and we try to not be, not let our device override that. Like, it's really powerful if you're someone who uses and moves your body to actually sort of listen to that inner, do I have a desire to train? And then actually follow through with that. And, if we wake up and don't have a desire to train, then that's a day where we just walk.
Yeah.
And we still move.
It's for us, that's an evolution, because we, in the old days, it was like
that's not.
Yeah. I mean, we would, it didn't matter. It was like 6 days a week, no matter what, maybe you take 1 day off. And so, we really have tried to learn how to listen a little better.
And you're talking, what's interesting is that's an individual. As soon as you're on a team, you're on a triathlon team, you're in a soccer team, you're going to have to perform. And this is what time practice is for everybody. So you don't have the luxury of really dialing up and dialing down. And so it becomes even more incumbent on us to ask, how can we control what we can control? When we're working with a Division I water polo team at a local university that's really good. Cal, shout out. They are... Go Bears. They are an incredible...
Sorry.
Please.
I know. It had to come up at some point.
They are an incredible... Coaches are world class. The women are amazing. Like, I really am inspired. I just volunteer and just get to be around. And one of the things I tell those women is they're not outworking the competition. That model has sailed, where you just like, I'll sneak in some extra volume. I'll do a little bit extra. Everyone is doing that. So what's the limiter now? The limiter for what we believe is how well you can adapt to the stress. Whoever can adapt the best can handle higher volume and still show up and be fresher. And we've been saying that forever, right? Whoever does the most volume and is the freshest wins. I think that's like Alan Lim or Pavel or someone. And so then we can say, well, if that's a generality, now can we apply that to humans, right? How can I show up for my family on the weekends without being torched? Or in the evening, and not black out on the couch because I'm so exhausted? How can I adapt to the stresses in my life, whether they're good or bad, and manage that in a way that leaves me or intact or leaves me to have more stress? And one of the things that we believe is, believe it or not, people think they're working really hard. They're not. And they could actually work harder. So some of this isn't just playing defense. Don't do this because you may get injured. We just think actually you're only working at like 50%. You know what I mean? Like you can actually go harder.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a very interesting time because this conversation around recovery, holding back, like trying to calibrate your output so that you're properly bouncing back and can be fresh for the next day is, even if you guys have been talking about it for a long time, is pretty new. Like, I'm older than you guys and I'm a product of that era where it's just like, you just go as hard and as long and as much as you can until you just absolutely break yourself. Like, swimming in the 80s, it was like volume. I mean, we were doing 20,000 meters a day every day. And you're going in and you're just, there was no like, okay, today you're going to ease off. And you just go in and you go as hard as you can for as long as you can. And I walked around like a zombie for like a decade and a half. And then you roll the dice on a 2-week taper and see how it goes. And, there was no like,
that's bananas. What you just said, by the way, is so bananas.
Oh, I mean, this was the whole sport, and I'm sure there were other sports that kind of approached this similarly. It was like, how much volume can we actually do?
Just to add to that really quickly, I was a rower at Cal.
It's similar.
And I mean, it was 30 hours a week plus of training, but we would train for 3 hours in the morning and then like another 4 hours in the afternoon. And even though the rowing season is spring, we would start doing that on like August 1st. I mean, it was just like it was just like,
how was your fueling then, Jay?
Ourselves.
How was your nutrition?
And all I ate was red vines and bagels.
Calories. It didn't matter what. Yeah. And like the idea, like, oh, you need to be fresh for the workout. What are you talking about?
No one ever talked about that. That was like not part of the conversation.
Not for nothing. Like 5 hours of swimming a day for a race that literally is like 47 seconds long,
and you were really good.
Right? Yeah, good. But like now I look at the times now and I can't even relate to the sport. Like the progress is extraordinary. And that is due in no small part, I'm sure, to the kind of work that you guys do and understanding how the body works and the importance, the primacy of recovery, like allowing your body to repair itself in between training sessions. Like, what is that about? Like literally just being a zombie for as long as possible and being in a chronic state of overtraining, which really is an injury. Like that is an injured.
It's a stress, and it's a stressor on the body. It's a stressor on the body. If you can't
do your job or occupy a role in the team, we call that an injury. Mm-hmm. Right? Clear mechanism injury. There's a bone sticking out of your arm, right? There's a fever, something going on.
Does being a zombie count?
Zombie, I think we're going to add that in. I really, that's a really important piece. I can't show up and perform the way I should perform. Yeah. And it's tricky. It's tricky working with young people. We have 2 teenagers and we are, turns out, the strictest parents in the whole, we're like, you will have to sleep. You'll have to eat these fruits and vegetables,
I heard you tell a story, like what's required in order for somebody to date your daughter these days? Have you updated that? Like,
Well, it's actually worked. So we,
it's worked to prevent her from dating?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, okay. I mean, just the myriad ways our kids are going to need to be in therapy in their 20s is it's starting to add up, I think. But, Kelly used to make his own like strongman stones.
Who doesn't?
And I would come into the backyard on like a Sunday afternoon and there he is stirring the concrete and pouring it into these molds. And I was like, you are such a weirdo. Like I'm even into this stuff, but that's weird.
Yeah.
And so we've had 2 or 3 of these, what do they weigh? 100, 150 pounds, these stones?
Some are a little heavier.
I thought you said 200 pounds.
It's 200.
I think it might be 200 pounds. And so we have
the Yannick
these
stone.
Stones in our yard. And Kelly's rule has always been, well, when Georgia starts dating someone, like if he or she wants to date our daughter, they need to be able to lift up this stone. And I said, and my point of view was like, no, you don't want the kid. You don't want like the oversized 17-year-old kid with like all the testosterone dating your daughter. I was like, that's actually the exact opposite kid you want.
The one kid who can lift that is actually not the kid you want.
You don't want that kid dating your daughter. But nevertheless, our daughter does have this lovely boyfriend named Yannick. And fortunately, the kid loves to train, and he can actually pick up the stone.
He heard the story finally.
He heard the story.
Rolled it out of the yard.
Yeah.
And then one day, and then he like sent me a picture with the stone on his shoulder.
Yeah. So Kelly was so proud.
I think what's interesting about that is I actually stole that idea from, I think it was Dan John, who said, it was like this, he had this test of like overhead squatting your body weight 10 times.
Mm-hmm.
And as a test, and as you get heavier and heavier, that becomes quite a thing. But just overhead squatting a barbell is quite a thing. But no one does that without practicing. No one does that without training. And so my intention with this is no kid just comes in and picks up the stone without having some things built in. Like this kid trains, this kid loves to play, this kid is interested in, theoretically it was a screening device, and maybe it was a little blunt, but the idea is that...
We also had that diet that we did in like 1999. Right?
Yeah, that's right. The vertical diet, only protein shakes.
No, it wasn't vertical diet. It was something else.
Velocity diet.
We briefly followed Dan John's diet.
Because we like to tinker.
We're tinkers. This was probably like 2003.
We made it 36 hours.
And the diet is you just eat protein powder for 30 days.
I don't think it was 30 days. Was it 30 days?
It was supposed to be 30 days.
Lord help us all.
But keep in mind that this was in the dawn of protein powder where, you could only get it you could only get it at GNC, and it was in these
Weight Gainer 900.
It was like Weight Gainer 900. And I actually was practicing law at this point. So I'm trying to do this and I think we made it 48 hours.
That is so messed up. I would like it if you didn't tell that story anymore. It shows us that like.
It makes it okay because it was 2003.
Body composition is the reason I think most people come to nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
If you're an athlete, maybe you come to nutrition because you're like, it is a secret weapon to fuel and do these things. But for most people, they initiate a conversation because it's about body composition. Or my cholesterol is so high, I got to stop eating this bacon.
Either a health
dates.
crisis or, weight loss. When you say body composition,
weight loss. That's right.
Weight loss.
Let's say weight loss.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And, imagine if I'm just like, hey, why don't you just eat some
protein powder for 30 days?
No, that's that metal taste in your mouth. It doesn't go away.
Food?
Yeah, food. I think that's really, as we're trying to untangle this, we keep flip-flopping back and forth between here, if you want to win a world championship, this is what we recommend. And we were going to help you find your blind spots so you can be more durable. And simultaneously, because that's our view through this. This is what we talk about with all of the SEALs and Delta Force and all of these things. And simultaneously, when we know what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So how do we scale that through? That comes from even ideas where I got to work with really good coaches. Mike Bergner is a good example, who was coaching high school kids in the morning, and then he'd go home in his evening and be coaching Olympians in Olympic lifting. And being there on either side of his day, I could see the through thinking in his methodology. What was essential? Why is he teaching this first skill? And how's that skill progress to go to the Olympics? And we should be able to do those things with these principles that, this is the foundation, and then you can get really sharp and pointy as you need to go as far as you want. Because really, we always talk about potential, and, sometimes I think it's easy to get doom and gloom, but really you can feel better and do more in your life if you take care of the care and feeding of this husk.
Yeah, the way that I see kind of the value of your work in the context of at least with respect to elite athletes is with respect to the best of the best, what's good for the goose isn't always good for the gander because they're doing something so specific and they're training really hard and they're training only specific muscle group, all that kind of stuff. Ultimately is potentially at odds with longevity, long-term health, like all these other, it's like if you're chasing a performance goal, that goal is not necessarily in alignment with long-term health goals.
Or even relationships, right?
Yeah, or everything else in your life, right? And you kind of come in and say, well, we have all of these other things that will help you long-term be the best elite athlete, but also are in service of your life as a civilian down the line. which I think
which is
great.
going to happen.
Ultimately, despite you thinking you're going to be like in that elite state for the rest of your life, you will not. I was at
I resemble that.
So I swam at Stanford in the late 80s, and my coach Skip Kenny recently passed away, and there was a memorial service for him up in Fresno where he moved. It was his hometown. He moved there after he retired, and so a ton of alumni, people that I swam with over the years, showed up for this event, and I was standing at the reception, and just off to the side was Anthony Moss, who in my era was the number 2 200 butterflyer in the world, Pablo Morales, winningest NCAA swimmer in history at the time, never lost a race at NCAA championships. Wow. And Sean Murphy, who was a Canadian backstroker, went to the Olympics, incredible finalist at the Olympics. And all three of them, this was the era in which the underwater dolphin kick was being pioneered for the first time. And all three of these guys, like their knees were bowing backwards, and they were standing like they're all standing like this. Like my knees hyper-extend a little bit, but like Anthony's literally looked like a bow back that way, like that, right? And I'm noticing this, and I knew this about them, and it's what made them. Those three guys were the best underwater dolphin kickers in the world at the time. Like they could go underwater faster than anybody. And I went up to Anthony because he had the most extreme, bow. And I'm like, "How's your back?" And he's like, "It's terrible. I've got bulged discs. I've had I can't remember. I don't think he's had surgery, but he's had chronic problems. He can't do flip turns in the pool anymore." And I was like, "Yeah, me too, man. Like, what do you think that's about?" And so I'm interested. So the reason I bring that up is it is that contrast between that quality made them extraordinary at that one thing. But here we're in our 50s, and there's chronic pain problems as a result of that's just the way he stands. It's probably the way he's always stood. It made him great at that one thing, and now is causing him pain. So that dissonance between what makes you great and elite at one thing and how you want to feel later in life and be stable, bulletproof, mobile, functional, and the rest.
We were hanging out with Sean Payton, who is now coach at Denver, and we were working with the Saints, and he had just gone to a Hall of Fame gala, and all of the coaches that he worshiped as his mentors had to be helped on stage with like multiple people helping them. They were so crippled. And he just said to himself, okay, that can't be me. You want to jump in?
Well, yeah, we actually just were talking to our old friend, Mark Bell, who is a world champion powerlifter. I don't know if you've heard of Mark Bell.
Yeah. But he's the Smelly Bell guy.
Mark Smelly Bell.
Yeah, hey, nice.
When he won his world championship, he was 330 pounds and sort of by all conventional metrics, like super unhealthy. Like he couldn't tie a shoe and he felt terrible. And, his blood panel was probably horrible at that time. And he was taking massive amounts of performance enhancing drugs. And, it's just like he was basically not doing well from a health standpoint, but that body allowed him to win a world championship. And then a few years later, he got injured doing a lift and kind of had this light bulb moment and realized that wasn't how he wanted to live his whole life. And he's actually spent the last 10 years basically trying to totally overhaul his body, rewild his body. And his transformation is exceptional.
He's running marathons.
And he's going to run the Boston Marathon. But he started literally by just walking 3 times a day for 10 minutes. He really started small and realized he had to take these real baby steps to sort of, figure out how to get back to health and transform his body and lose all that weight and gain back some of his mobility. But I mean, it's been a slow process. It's taken him 10 years of baby steps and just adding in different practices as his body got, better and more mobile and healthier. And now 10 years later, he's running a marathon next month.
And let me apologize to all the athletes in the 80s who went before. In the 90s, we broke a lot of people. The model, you were right. Yeah. As long as the clock was faster and you did it and solved it, there were a lot of eggs that were broken that didn't need to be broken. And if you could survive because you had the will and the coach and the support, you maybe came out of that and thrived or survived and did well enough. One of the things that we like to say is you should come out of this thing unharmed. Even at your elite, crashes are going to happen. Of course, there's going to be, you may have some laxity in your shoulders. There's some things like that are related. But it isn't necessarily a given that because they were able to have a greater range of motion and hyperextend their knees a little bit, it's called genu recurvatum, that doesn't always translate to low back dysfunction. But what we see is this special skill that gave them this incredible kick and big range doesn't necessarily, we didn't know how to control it or support it or take some of the load out of the low back. And what we did was we just said, well, as long we worship the clock. Instead of saying, are there inputs in there? Think about the nutrition, just Power Bar was just on the scene. I remember hearing I think it's Dave Scott talking about running with bags of figs and bananas.
Bananas and dates.
Oh my gosh. And so if that's how far we've come, we know what we know because we broke a lot of people. And I want to say that absolutely you're right, that sometimes there is a cost at being an elite. There is a cost. But not necessarily it's one-to-one that had to be the outcome. It was the only outcome we knew how to deliver at that time. But if you look at, what Stanford has done to support its athletes, because we work there, they're really sophisticated about nutrition and, and supporting. And it looks like a very, because you go back, but you're like, where am I? This is Mars.
It's a completely different place from when I was there. In a good way.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we can say you can do this and you don't necessarily have to have spinal surgery.
Right. So in thinking about these vital signs and the kind of principles around mobility and stability, et cetera, I want to talk a little bit about some of the, core things that the listener or somebody who's watching this should be thinking about incorporating into their daily routine. I don't want to complicate people's morning routines, of course, God forbid, but what are some of the key things that you think, move the needle the most that people are not thinking about, not practicing about, not.
How about let's start with just getting some input, beginning a conversation with your body about pain or about making yourself feel better. We think that in our clinical experiences that if we had people do a little bit of myofascial work, rolling, soft tissue, self-massage, whatever language you're comfortable with, in the evening before they went to bed, that was a great entree into understanding your body, feeling your blind spots, getting non-threatening input into the system. So if you, in the evening, could sit down next to a ball, a tennis ball, a softball, a roller, and ask yourself from the day, what's sore? What hurts? What's achy? And I'm going to commit 10 minutes. The first part of this show I'm watching, I'm just going to roll around on whatever ails me. That's a really important conversation you could begin to have. And I'm talking about 10 minutes. That's super reasonable. And the reason we started shifting that to the day, from the day and the gym to the evening was that we saw that people didn't actually do it or want to do it as a team. But in the evening, they had time and agency and nothing was happening at the end of the day. You're on Facebook, you're surfing Instagram. So there was this great moment where you could do some self-care, and 10 minutes a night usually turns into 12 to 14 minutes because you discover something. You can sit on your coffee table, put that ball right in your hamstrings, just roll around. Then the next sort of level there is we could say, hey, can you take a full breath in that position? So if you're working on something or you've got some aspect of your body that hurts and you push on it and that takes your breath away or you catch your breath, then we found an area of interest. And it doesn't mean we need to shy away from that. It's okay that that's uncomfortable to compression. So one of the first things we can do is say, am I doing harm to myself? No, not at all. If you can take a full breath in and out, you're signaling to your brain, this is safe. Nerves are king of the breath. The breath is king of the brain. That's Iyengar 101. And why breathing is such an important part of yoga is teaching your body to accept and be able to control those positions by breathing there. Your brain says, it's not a threat. So if you find a painful spot or a sore spot or an uncomfortable spot, you found a spot. And all you need to do is take a 4-second inhale there, contract into the ball or roller, and hold that for 4 seconds. We call that an isometric in the parlance, right? You're just building a tension or a movement without motion in the limb. And then exhale a long time for 8 seconds, long exhale. And what you'll find is if you just repeat that cycle a few times, whatever hurts in that area that you're working sometimes starts to hurt less. You're desensitizing. You're changing resetting some threat signals. And if you started doing that on your back, your hips, your calves, your feet, what you realize is, wow, I can make myself feel better. And because you did it before you bed, it's like getting a massage. You tend to sleep a little bit
You're
better.
down regulating.
Yeah, and we snuck in breath practice.
And you had to get up and down off the ground in order to do that work.
You ruined it.
Yeah.
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we talked about it a little bit earlier, but we are really such huge fans of people, using these practices and thinking about how they can constrain or change their environment so they don't have to think about it. We have standing desks everywhere at our office, so you can sit. We have stools, but the default is to stand, and so it just makes it not a choice if you're, you can't rely on your willpower that day. And, we have mobility tools all over our living room floor, and we have easy ways to sit on the floor, and we have balance boards all over our house, and, ways to practice balance. And, I'm sure you've heard of Chris Hinshaw's old man balance test, where you put your shoes on one.
Oh, this is great. Everyone, you're welcome.
Everyone listening should do this test.
What's it called again?
It's called the Chris Hinshaw, and it's called the Old Man Balance Test. And he actually created it so that he would have something to compete against his kids and win. And so the idea is you put your socks and shoes on the floor and you stand on one leg and you reach down and grab your sock and you put on your sock without putting that foot down. And then you reach down and grab your shoe and put your shoe on and tie it. And then you switch and do it on the other side. And it's a really great 2-minute balance practice. And that's how I put my shoes on every single day. And that's something
mischief managed.
That's just this little, small behavior that we add into our day that's easy and fun, and you can, challenge your kids to do it. And so, that's just one of those things that we've snuck in and said, hey, there are ways that you can change your environment and just slightly think about your environment differently so that these are just things you do without having to rely on willpower or motivation.
I think I would struggle with that.
Everyone struggles with it. It's okay.
Yeah. It's hard.
And that's okay. Keep in mind that if you just grease that, I mean, I don't know where you're living, some kind of barefoot cult. That's cool. But, some of what we're trying to do is that dynamic balance work. And if you can just start to think about your environment a little differently, then that's something you never have to do ever again. I don't need you to work on balance because you did all this. And if you really want to make it super gnarly, put your shoe 3 feet away from you. And you have to do like a crazy lunge or drinking game to get it. But when you start to shape your world this way, rinse, wash, repeat for a decade, and let me know how that goes for you. And you brought it up. It's difficult for us to imagine our futures. I think in economics, we always think that the future is going to be more valuable. I think there's a term and phrase for that.
Right.
But in willpower, we always think Kelly Starrett tomorrow is not going to eat the cookie, and he'll start yoga tomorrow, right? But that future self is never as valuable as today.
And you'll have more money and more time, and you'll be able to do all the things that you can do today. Right?
And I think it's also important for people to, once you, with this old man balance test, for example, we traveled yesterday, sat on a plane, did a lot of driving. I may have had a harder training session. And so, every single day, my experience is different with it. I have some days where I just grease it and get my shoe and sock on, tie my shoe, and I'm like, I am crushing this. And then other days based on, what's been going on in my life, it's different, but it's all just sort of information I have. And I'm able to say, hey, I'm struggling a little bit with my balance today. I'm feeling a little bit stiff. Maybe I should spend a little time, mobilizing my hips today and make sure I get enough steps in because I was, stuck sitting all day yesterday on a plane. It's like, it's just information on which we can make different decisions.
And the vital sign is a good piece of data. It's called the SOLEC. Standing one leg, eyes closed. And you should be able to stand on one leg, remove the visual field, that's with the eyes closed, and balance for 20 seconds without touching. That's the benchmark. It sounds
really easy, but it's not.
I was just speaking at a big conference, and a provider from Norway came up and he said, what we do is that the SOLEC is actually too hard for most people. And so what we do is we put them in front of a wall, a white wall. So you can do this with your parents so they can touch the wall. But the white wall allows them to keep their eyes open, but removes the visual information.
Right.
Because what happens is as we get older, we stop feeling. Remember the foot has so much real estate in the brain, right? That homunculus sort of sensory motor cortex part. And if you take away the eyes, if you have downregulated how good your feet are, how surfaces you're on, you take away a lot of key balance visual information. He started doing this because elderly fall in Norway in snowstorms because it's all white and you don't get any visual information. Or in crowds, people fall in crowds because you can't see where the ground is and understand. So, it turns out, of course, that we're obsessed with foot function. And being barefoot and having rock solid rad feet makes you better at surfing and everything else.
Yeah, and it's such a simple thing, right? That
and not
seems
sexy.
Like it would be easier, at least when you get older. It starts to get harder.
But when we started working on, there's obviously from our friends at FMS, and it's originally a Gary Gray idea, this Y balance test, where you can actually have someone stand on one leg and then just make a Y. The first part of the Y goes out in front of you, and then the two other arms go behind you, and you can just reach out as far as you can with your foot and take a breath there. And we use it as a dynamic warm-up. I hand you a medicine ball, and then I'm like, okay, how far can you get that foot out in front of you? And suddenly you realize, there is time for me to play more in some of my training. If you're jumping on the trainer, mountain biking is our jam, and I spend a lot of time on the trainer. And during my warm-ups for the trainers, when I do a lot of exploring and playing, and I see something on the internet and I'm like, ooh, that rope looks cool, or that's fun. I use it as a warm-up device. And I think one of the things we could give to all the athletes listening and people who like to exercise is incorporate a little bit more play into your training. Still do the training. We're still gonna suffer and do brutal 1 minute on pieces or whatever it is we're gonna do. But there's a lot of exploration. And it may be as simple as Juliet and I love to go out and play Frisbee, before we go exercise.
Or like we have double Dutch ropes at our office.
Ooh,
and I don't know the last time you tried to do double Dutch, but it's really hard.
It might have been, it might be 50 years at this point.
It was early 80s.
If I've ever tried it, I don't know.
It was
That's how we pick a kickball
playground
team.
Yeah, but we have double Dutch ropes around, and we have balance boards, and we have, in our garage at our house, we have a pegboard, and every single teenager who walks through our garage beelines directly for the pegboard and tries their luck on the pegboard. And so we just try to have these things around to make it fun and play, and so that it's not just all get on the bike and crush yourself. We just try to make some of this fun because it is fun to use your body and be able to use your body and connect with other people and throw a ball and throw a Frisbee. And
if there was one thing, though, people love to ask us, what's the one mobilization? What's the one secret?
It's my favorite thing to watch Kelly's face when someone asks him this. He does this
I could just do
hey
one
Kelly, if I
thing.
just do one thing, what would it be? And so his head tilts to the side, and then he kind of starts twitching a little bit.
Because really asking was what's not important, right?
Yeah, and so I just peek out from the background and I'm like, the couch stretch.
I think today we are not spending enough time with the hip and extension. And if you go to a yoga class and jump into Warrior One, where you're like, wow, you're really into this kind of triangle pose, split stance position. And there's a reason that's so heavily in a lot of the movements of rehab, of sort of movement practice. It's such an important That's the position we walk around in, being able to take my leg behind me and sprint faster. And if I want to run faster, I'm going to need to have that knee further and further behind my butt into a lunge. But it's the one thing I think we're witnessing as modern people, because we do so much sitting and so much, work on the computer, we're seeing that people are losing that capacity to effectively have that leg behind them. Yeah. And we have a test in there called the couch stretch test, which is a shocker. And to your point earlier, someone said, hey, I can't activate my glutes. One of the things that happens is that if that anterior line, so the line running down the front of your body, your quads, the connective tissue system, your hip capsule, if you can't bring that hip effectively behind you, like in a deep lunge, and squeeze your butt, that tells us we sort of are being inhibited by that position. And oftentimes what happens is that we end up in shapes where we're not very competent. We don't even have the range, or we don't have the exposure there, whatever is the limiter. And that can inhibit our ability to control that. And one of the reasons we see that stiff quads, being on a bike, kicking, long lever kicking all day long, rectus femoris, all the running can make us really stiff. All of a sudden, when we're in hip extension, or hip extension, we can't squeeze the butt effectively or recruit very effectively. We call it positional inhibition that can contribute to the loss of glute function controlling the back. So whether it's knee pain or low back pain, and we have so many stories of us adding in these movements, some lunges, some Bulgarian split squats, some isometrics in these positions, and people's backs get better, their knees get better, their butts turn on. That would be the thing I would say.
Yeah.
I'm obsessed with. The one thing. I'm sorry, everyone, the one thing.
The one thing.
Plus vegetables.
Well, that's like the main antidote for all the sitting and the sedentary lifestyle. That is the low hanging fruit.
position
Like that's the one thing that
Yeah.
like we're all doing too much of. That's contributing to all of these imbalances and ultimately, atrophies of certain muscle groups that lead to our pelvises not being like all of the kind of things that have those lower back and knee downstream, injury repercussions.
And when people, if you're listening to this and you're like, hey, I've got some pain in my body, it can be really daunting to say what's going on there. And if I give you this laundry list of like sleep, nutrition, hydration, stress, breathing practice, you're like, whoa, okay, that's a lot. I got to work on that. But one of the things you can absolutely control right away is your range of motion. And oftentimes when you go see a physician or we're trying to manage pain in positions, no one really owns range of motion or position. What we end up seeing is there's all this conversation about the tissue health or getting stronger, but no one ever checks your native range of motion. And we see this actually as a feature of a lot of the very sophisticated training. So we've had the pleasure of working with the 49ers last year. And one of the things their strength and conditioning staff has identified was the rehab staff is putting out fires and trying to get return players to the field. The strength staff is trying to develop the capacities and physiology. Let's get you stronger and fitter. But no one really owned full position. So they had athletes who were coming in who couldn't bring their knees up very high or missing hip extension or ankles. And they were realizing that they weren't really seeing it. And then the rehab staff might put people out back into play, but they were pain-free or healed, and now they got to do their job. And the strength staff was like, didn't get enough time to develop these positions. But as a mortal person, if I discover that there's some aspect of my tissue system, I have shoulder pain, for example. I'm just saying I don't, but you get the idea. If I can't put my arm over my head, that's a really simple place to start by restoring the function of your body. And you can imagine if you're swimming and you're ineffective at putting your arm over your head, that's going to be tricky.
Sure.
Right? So when we can start giving people some simple diagnostics, some vital signs around key movement features, that can be a really powerful way to untangle what seems like very complex pain problems.
Yeah. I mean, the question that I have as a follow-up to that is where does flexibility come in? Because when you talk about range of motion, particularly if you're over-indexing on strength work, you're going to reduce your range of motion.
Not necessarily. You shouldn't.
Well, like I just know if I start throwing heavy weight around, like suddenly, like I'm swinging my arms around my shoulder, it doesn't feel the way it did, prior to putting on a little bit more muscle mass, unless I really focus on making sure that I'm maintaining that.
And there it is, right?
Of flexibility.
You can't just say to someone, get stronger. I just saw a great coach named Franz Bosch talk about if you get hypertrophy on athletes, you just get them big, you can actually really wreck their coordination. You change the pennation, that's how the fibers align, you change angles of pull, you change how the brain is interpreting what's going on. You have to account, you can't just say, get stronger. Otherwise, we just give you blood pressure, blood flow restriction cuffs and an assault bike, and we would just get everyone big.
Well, yeah, and on the extreme spectrum of that, just look at a bodybuilder. They can barely move. They have
That's right.
Yeah, like
no
our
range
friend,
of motion
like
at
our
all.
friend Mark Bell. He literally couldn't, he had to put a shoe on with a stick.
Did you watch Physical 100?
No.
Oh, it's this great Korean show where they brought in
I've seen Netflix. I've seen the ads
so
for it, but
fun.
I haven't watched it.
It is
You'll
really
love
fun.
it.
Like ripped up like Korean dudes.
Well, and men and women who are badass. Wrestlers, skeleton athletes, track cyclists. We won't give it away.
It's very diverse, though. I mean, it's like every kind of, there's some dancers.
There's a 50
really
kilo concrete ball. And then there's a test, they call it like the Hercules test or something, Atlas, and they had to just hold it. They had a couple strongman and
you had to
another
get
guy.
it over your
head. You had to get it over your head.
Get over your head and then stand
and
there
there's
and hold
a
it.
jacked bodybuilder in there. You're like, well, that guy. I mean, clearly
He's
that's the guy.
definitely going to win. Like, that
unless
guy's
you
got
have any insider knowledge. And that guy couldn't even get the ball over his head and hold it for 1 second. Everyone else held it for 2 hours. He couldn't even find a position because the cost of his aesthetic drive had nothing to do with the application of that. And I think one of the things that you bring a really good point to is our fetishization of the gym and gym culture hasn't necessarily always connected to, am I training for something? What's the minimum dose in the gym so I can be a better swimmer? Right? We're like, just get bigger and stronger. Strength is never a weakness. If it starts to mess up your swim,
if you can't put your arms over your head because
that's
you're so
fair
strong,
and valid.
then
or you just start to cramp up.
You could,
yeah.
You don't have to, but suddenly somewhere in there, I think Tyler Hamilton said in his book, would you rather have your hematocrit up 2 points or be 2 pounds lighter? He's like 2 pounds lighter, because strength to weight does make a difference. That matters. So those are all considerations. And if your point is that I'm doing something, we call that session cost. And if that thing is removing my ability to move freely, I need to either modify it or put in another stimulus to maintain my range. It doesn't necessarily mean just because I got a little bit stronger that I have to change my technique or style. But it could certainly if we're not keeping an eye on it. And I think that was why a lot of athletes were like, hey, I'm a worse swimmer when I do this leg press, right?
Yeah. You start bulking up and suddenly you don't have the flow and the technique and the range of motion.
I believe you.
Yeah. But the important distinction here is that mobility work is not the same as stretching. And you make that point pretty clearly in the book. Like there is a distinction between these two things. Just because you're stretching, you're not working on your mobility.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. I mean, you could be, but and I'll let Kelly talk about the anatomy part of this. But I mean, I think what we learned in the 80s and 90s, and I know I did when I was a D1 athlete at Cal, is that nobody ever really did much stretching because it didn't work that much, right? We were just all passively, stretching our tissues.
You guys stretched? You would swing your arms around the plank on
swimmers,
stretching. I was like incredibly flexible. Yeah. And then when I got back into multi-sport in my 40s, there was this idea like, oh, you shouldn't stretch if you're a runner. And I kind of bought into that. And I've lost a lot of that flexibility to my detriment. Like I wish I had kept that up. And I think that has been harmful. Me.
Your range of motion doesn't, I don't want to jump in on you,
please.
But your range of motion doesn't have to change because you age. That's the one physical, you're going to be less powerful. You may be able to maintain your aerobic power for a long time. We know that to be true, but your ability to express your range of motion in your joints doesn't have to degrade necessarily. You may have bony blocks and a patina of athleticism.
You got to work through the fascia and all that.
Right, but stuff, as we take this systems approach, you being able to get up and down off the ground or flex your knee all the way doesn't have to go away. And I think that's important to remember, to consider for people.
Yeah.
Squatting.
Oh boy.
People
That's
love
my
to
weakness.
talk about squatting.
They do. I couldn't agree more.
We're obsessed with deadlifting and squatting for some reason.
You know what's amazing? We just made 2 new things. One of them is a pad that makes it easier to do a Bulgarian split squat. So you can slip this pad on the end of a barbell and you can put your foot up there, and it really does help you get into a lunge. And it doesn't work. People hate it. They don't like to do this movement. It doesn't sell. But it's like one of our best ideas. We just did another thing that allows you to do hip thrusts, which is when you lay on a bench and you put a barbell on your hips, and it's kind of a modified squat. People love that. And to your point, it's so much more fun to squat. It is not fun to sprint, lunge, get into these split stance positions.
But why are these so important? Like, why did you make an entire vital sign chapter on squatting? Like, why is this so key in your mind?
Really, you're going to lower yourself up and down a bunch. So you squat all the time, whether you like it or not. And notice in this book, we don't talk about squatting weights. We just talk about the ability to access the squat. And the reason that's such a fundamental position is that it ties in a lot of joints and a lot of tissue systems all at once. So we don't just look at your ankle by itself or knee by itself or hip by itself. We're looking at coordinating the system. And getting up and down out of a chair, off the toilet, all of those things, very important. Cycling is a bunch of single leg squats done in that position. So what we can start to ask is, I don't always have to be a bilateral squat. Can I do a single leg squat in that position? But when we say squat, what we really mean is I'm in a hinged shape and my knee is bending towards my chest. That's really the definition of a squat. So to take squatting away means that you're going to not be moving in your environment very well. And it's an easy diagnostic for people to quickly pick up if they're having these gross motor restrictions or can't access these positions. I think that's amazing. And if you want to go in Japan or toilet in another country, or you're going to find that sitting by the side of the road waiting for a bus, we should have access to these positions. These are resting positions.
Well, and I also, there's data to show that people in those cultures have far fewer orthopedic injuries, hip replacements, low back pain, and sort of a lot of the chronic issues and pain problems that we have, as Western humans that are sitting in chairs and have lost the ability to squat.
It's malasana in yoga, right? It's this deep squat position. And one of the reasons that it's so important is that it's one of the ways where we can get really good flexion in the lumbar spine. Where when we sit all the way down, like we're just hanging out, whether your heels are up off the ground or not, your knee comes to your chest, you take that knee in full range of motion, you take that hip into that aspect of full range of motion, and the lumbar spine reverses. And so it's a restorative position for so much of the extension, arching forces that are sort of modern and endemic to us. It's a way of restoring and putting in loaded flexion into people in a really graded position.
And that's my most challenged position for me of all the tests in this book. That's where I struggle the most. And, like you said, you wish you'd focused a little bit more. I mean, my ankle range of motion is terrible. And, I was still with terrible ankle range of motion able to be a D1 rower at Cal and go on to win 3 world championships
you do a
in
flip
paddling.
Turn.
And,
are you pushing off the wall in a squat?
Well, certainly you are. Yeah.
So it turns out maybe, if we had been more effective, we could have shaved more time by getting you and training you into positions to be more efficient. Just to be clear, you don't have to be a huge squatter. I think a squat is a practice. We can goblet squat, hold something in front of you. You could just air squat. I think there are better ways and more effective ways for most people to train the system. Do I need to have my mother-in-law do heavy back squats? No. We've definitely fetishized it because it's easy to see progress. I can put another kilo on the bar. It's easy to measure, that I've changed some capacity. But does it make me better at my sport? Maybe not. So there's an old saying, train the deadlift, train the hinge, kettlebell swings, good mornings, those kinds of things. Practice the squat.
Right. But the ability to squat, even if it's just air squat, do it without pain, et cetera, becomes like this proxy for longevity, right? Like the longer that you can kind of maintain your ability to do that, puts you in a position where you're not going to fall down and break your hip, or you're going to have that kind of flexibility.
Or your pelvic floor is going to work better. And you're going to start to expose the connective tissue systems of your body to the forces that were there and have been there all along because you used to toilet on the ground. I'm not trying to romanticize paleo living. I don't we watch Alone, and now we're like primitive living.
We watch Alone, and we have
primitive
no
living is not for me. I'm not into
actually,
it.
I was really happy to see that. Like there is a fetishization of the ancestral lifestyle, all of that, and
we're like, not for us.
The first time
that is. I mean, listen, you talk about the de-wilding and the rewilding and all of that. Like there is wisdom in trying to live our lives more in alignment with certain aspects of how we've evolved to be, et cetera. But that doesn't mean we need to, martyr ourselves.
No, on the contrary. I first time I ever was sort of discovered paleo, I was like, that makes sense. I'm eating more whole foods. Like that makes sense. The old osteopathic model was don't eat anything that's white and don't eat anything that doesn't rot. And I was like, well, that's also really good, right? That pulls out a lot of things that potentially irritant to people. So I sent this to Juliet. I was like, what do you think about this?
This, by the way, was in 2003. So it was
2002.
early.
Yeah, I remember.
Early.
I remember all
paleo,
of this.
right?
Yeah.
And I did a little, I was probably still at my law firm. I did a little bit of Google research, whatever you could do back then. And the first paleo recipe that came up was a recipe for larva soup or something. And I was like, dude, Kelly, we're not doing this. Like, I was like, this is way too extreme for us. Like, it's not up this whole paleo thing is like, I was like,
But
people in the Paleolithic era died at age 30.
A lot of has changed in the last 150 years for sure.
Yeah.
And what we can say is like, there's definitely a trend to getting a little bit more light in the morning. People are talking about that.
There's one guy responsible for that.
You may have heard that you're supposed to face the sun in the morning.
But what we can start to say is, well, what are the biologic processes that are required for my body to function well? And a good example is walking. Your lymphatic system is the sewage system of your body. So everyone knows their cardiovascular system. You have capillaries, arteries, veins, but your lymphatic system is how you move all of the other normal waste from your body. So if you've injured yourself, you get swelling, all of that swelling is evacuated through your lymphatic system. Your joints are drained through your lymphatic system. The proteins break down, the gut things, all of those things get recycled back into the body through the lymphatic system. Your lymphatic system is built into your movement system. What drives the lymphatic clearage? It turns out it's pumping of the muscles. So if you don't squeeze your lower limbs, you don't actually decongest and circulate. So Andy Weil talked about, was it cross-pattern motion? Well, maybe it was just that we were moving, and in that moving and breathing, we're starting to decongest and move the waste out. And if you've ever had a sink that's clogged up, that is an example of what's happening when you sit on an airplane and you get cankles. You're not decongesting.
Right. Which is why, doctors are so obsessed with getting people up out of bed that, as soon as they can after surgery, because the only way to really clear your lymph is to walk around, is to move and keep moving.
So now we can start to say, well, if walking is about drainage, how many steps do I need in order to facilitate that? And it turns out 6,000 to 8,000 is a pretty good number to get people moving. And again, that's not even about burning calories. That's not about strong feet. That's just about
circulation.
Yeah.
So I think when you're right, when we can push back on this romanticizing, hunting my own chickens in my backyard, I don't need to do that. But somehow there are some things that used to happen to us. We used to sit on the ground a lot. We cooked on the ground. We toileted on the ground. We slept on the ground. We walked around. There's some things we did that we probably could do a little more.
Well, we were in a persistent state of like low energy movement, right? Like we were just kind of like moving throughout the day consistently. Right. That's another Blue Zones thing as well. Like, and we don't really do that. Like even if you make this point in the book, like you may go to the gym and kill it, but then you sit in a chair all day, and that's certainly like that's me. That's a lot of people.
Yeah,
right? And this is not great.
And we're not saying that
you're not flushing out. You're not
right.
All of that kind of stuff, is not happening.
So if you're an elite athlete or someone who trains hard, because I think that the distinguishing between an elite athlete and someone who trains like that is your genetics and what you're doing with it. Because as you have seen, people are training really hard and have gotten really sophisticated about their training. They're training like the elites, whether they can handle it or not.
Right.
And one of the things we know is if you want to have a better adaptation to that, you need to continue to decongest and continue to move along those waste products.
Exercise, movement.
That's it. Yeah, and whatever that looks like to you.
Yeah.
And bringing it back to sunlight, that's, one of the, we're obsessed with walking, as I think and just general movement and non-exercise activity throughout the day. But, it's also this bonus thing where you get a little bit of sunlight on your body. You decongest your tissues. You accumulate a bunch of non-exercise activity.
Check this out. Yeah. Our daughter, Caroline, was a preemie. And Juliet had placenta previa. Caroline comes a little early. We are being discharged from UCSF. Really good hospital. Super gnarly. Caroline, who is 5'10" now, her APGAR was 2. She was very small and purple. And she's a monster.
And purple.
And they were like, okay, you're leaving. And Juliet is breastfeeding. She's made this heroic effort to get milk into our kid. And they're like, you just got to give your kid these vitamins. And I was like, look at me.
Yeah, Kelly's like, isn't breast milk like God's food, like the perfect food? Like, what are you talking about? I have to give my kid these vitamins.
I just know enough as a physical therapist to be annoying.
This is UCSF,
right?
That place is the shit.
They are the shit, and they saved both my kid and my wife. I'm very grateful. But so I asked them, what do you mean I have to give my kid these vitamins? I'm like, have you tasted these vitamins? Like, they're awful. And why do I give my kid these vitamins? She's drinking milk. And they were like, well, you just really got to do it. And I was like, what's the problem? And they said, well, the problem is women in San Francisco don't get enough sun or don't go into the sun. So there's not enough vitamin D in the milk. And so the child oftentimes...
we were like, so we could just go into the sun with our baby and then not have to take these vitamins. And so we just would lay our little teeny daughter, who was like 6 pounds at this point, we would just lay her in the sun for like 3 minutes a day. And she was fine.
That's how they used to get rid of jaundice in the kids.
Yeah.
So that's a kind of a case study of the fact that we make some of these, from no fault of our own, we find ourselves in environments where we have to now be a little bit more conscious about some of these other things.
Yeah. A sort of analogous thing that you talk about, or like a counterintuitive sort of thing that I was really happy to see, because I've always agreed with this, but never really was validated for it, which is that you should not put ice on an injury, right? Like, it's always struck me as wrong. Like, it's like, oh, you got to get the inflammation down. It's like, it's inflamed for a reason. Your body is sending all of this stuff there.
Where did you figure that out? Who told you that? Like, that's crazy.
I have to tell the backstory here. So I think this was back in 2011, maybe. We were at the CrossFit Games, and we met up with a guy, Gary Reinl, who wrote the book Iced, and he was really the first person to
in my world,
in our world anyway, to take this different perspective on icing. And at that time, though, the guy who had created Rice had already turned the corner and said that's was actually
rest,
terrible.
Ice, compression elevation.
That was terrible advice. So there was starting to be this groundswell of people talking about how icing injuries was not the way to go. And we put up this 1 hour long video on YouTube where Kelly was interviewing Gary Reinl about icing injuries. And that thing first of all, this was in the dawn of time and we were unpro. So we put the video on YouTube, and the title of it was like IMG_447. And we just put it out. It was the olden days. And we put it out, and this thing starts getting
of the
thousands and thousands of views. But I mean, there's been a couple things we put out into the world that have generated a lot of hate and skepticism. And I think that icing video was probably top of the list because it was so shocking to people. I mean, it's just default. If a kid injures themselves, you make an ice bag. It's just this. It was so part of our understanding of how to manage an injury in the short term that people were like really bothered by this advice. And, slowly but surely, I think people, the word's been getting out that icing injuries is not the way that you actually, you want to welcome that
in the
swelling.
Cold plunge community, people are realizing maybe we need to put that cold a little bit further away from
training stimulus.
And
that's not even the same thing as icing something for hours.
The reason you train is to create the stimulus and an adaptation. And if you are robbing your body of that adaptation by getting in the cold, then you've just undercut the purpose of the training itself. And I believe in ice baths. I have an ice bath. I think it's great, but I think you have to be conscious about the timing, when, the purpose, and all of that. And listen, if it's halftime at the Super Bowl and you blow your knee out and you got to get back in the game, put some ice on it. And you want to reduce that inflammation, reduce the pain so you can go, if there's an immediacy to the thing. But if you're trying to heal yourself, you want heat. You want to get blood flow in there. You want to get your immune system sending what it needs to be sending to that area to repair it as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and you're right. It can be a short-term pain reliever, but it's not a great long-term strategy.
If your kid gets a bee sting, give her a bag of ice.
And if you cut off your finger, you should put it in ice. That's also another
where did you find?
way.
Where did you figure that out? Because that is really so progressive.
It just seemed obvious to me, but it was so contrarian. Like I don't know. I never really talked to anybody about it, but I've always preferred putting heat on any kind of injury over ice for that reason.
The head athletic trainers in Major League Baseball now basically say we don't ice anymore, and if you're doing that, you can't keep up with how we're managing these soft tissue injuries. And really, what you can see is the body so sophisticated that we're going to modulate this process of angiogenesis and remodeling tissues by getting it cold. And for everyone who's out there who isn't into the cold physiology, when you have an injury, your body sends out a whole bunch of chemical signals to the rest of your body. And these circulating cells, local stem cells, circulating cells come and repair that. The macrophages, they gobble up the tissue. And what can happen when you get something cold is you cut that connection.
Right,
you suppress prostaglandin
right.
release.
Yeah.
That's the same reason where we say now we're like, ooh, ibuprofen, maybe let's not use ibuprofen because it may do the same, healing limiting problem. You're going to go on.
But
with
on
your
the
life.
other side of that coin, if you have to go out there and perform as an athlete and you need to take a couple of ibuprofen because that's how you're going to make it through your game or
You're
sport,
a pro.
Yeah.
then that's fine. I mean, we're not using anti-inflammatory in the right context, but but I will say that, even though there's been a conversation about this icing thing for well over 10 years, maybe 15 years at this point, I mean, still it's the default though for most of the people we know who have an ACL tear or, any kind of orthopedic surgery for the recommendation from the physician to send them home to ice or get a game ready. So, I mean, we're making little baby steps and trying to get that word out, but it's still, people really still
you feel like you're doing something
right away.
I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
And until, like so many other behaviors, until we give someone else something else to do, we're going to default to the thing that makes me feel like I've done something. I took this, this pill that has micronutrients in it. That must be good enough as eating a salad or vegetables, right? Or fruits. And yes, that's better than nothing. But in this situation, it just turns out now we were incomplete in our thinking and we reserved the right to evolve our positions. And here's one where we think we weren't as effective as we were. And the proof is we're returning to people to play at higher levels of function faster because now people are healing at the rates of human beings. We're not delaying that or retarding that healing process. We're just saying, hey, there's no such thing as a fast healer. You're going to heal at your genetic limit. Let's at least get you to that limit.
Right, and not unnecessarily slow it down. I mean, it seems to me to be a conversation around the difference between a chronic, talking about inflammation. Is it a chronic inflammation or is it an acute inflammation? If you have an injury, you have an acute inflammation, you need to figure out how to address that. Chronic inflammation, that's a different protocol and a different set of problems that need to be looked at.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And it's okay to become more nuanced and not just attack everything with the same hammer. I think that's absolutely okay. And even if we just, sometimes people get a little confused on this and we love getting cold. We think it's really fun. Yeah. And maybe that's just the best part of it. It's super fun. That we feel better. And wait for this, everyone, all you touchy-feely data people, athletes that feel better tend to perform better. People that feel better in their lives tend to be more stoked and do better. So if icing, getting in a cold plunge, makes you feel better, I'm down with it. It could be range of motion for your vasculature. It could just be...
Well, there's hormonal impacts
Sure.
to it as well,
What I'm saying is there are so many aspects of monkeying with being uncomfortable. Laird Hamilton says, hey, heating up and cooling down are the two most expensive processes your body engages with. Let's become more efficient at that. Well, that seems reasonable. Have you ever done heat training for Ironman?
Well, and
no, I know, but I know like people who train for bad water put treadmills in saunas and things like that.
So we know we can adapt to these things a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, our friend Michael Easter wrote a great book called The Comfort Crisis, and one of his main points is that we've in our modern world we no longer feel any discomfort, and one of the easiest ways to do that is to get hot and cold. And so, that's one of the 10,000 reasons that
in your shower
that we love those two things. But I think the other side benefit of our own heat and cold practice is for us, and this may be what's been the greatest part of for us is that it's a chance for us to connect together, and then also we use it as a community building.
It's a social thing.
It's a social thing.
Good enough.
We've had some of the best connections and conversations with our friends and community and people who come over for dinner in the sauna that we've had in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And I mean, so there are a myriad of well-studied health benefits at this point to sauning and definitely emerging in terms of cold plunging. But, if I could look back and say the greatest thing that, our sauna has done for us is just connection.
Yeah. Gabby and Laird call the sauna the Truth Barrel.
Yes.
And then Neil Strauss and Gabby had a podcast called the Truth Barrel where they would get someone in the sauna to have a conversation. I think I think Tim Ferriss was the first one to do that when he had Rick Rubin in his sauna for a podcast conversation.
Oh my gosh.
Well, yeah, and
the heat will bring the truth.
And then you'd
out.
see the guests slowly start to by the end of the podcast, they're sitting on the floor of the sauna, and it's like Gabby and Laird are just totally fine, and the guest is like dead.
Well, they
and
crank it up to like 220.
Yeah.
I mean, it's no joke.
It is no joke.
It gets in that thing for sure. But you have your own sauna cold plunge protocol in the book. I can't remember exactly, but I think it's 3 minutes in the cold and then you kind of go back a number of times.
Think of it this way. We think we're privy to a lot of tech and a lot of ideas, but we think that the functional unit of measurement is the household. It's you and your roommates, you and your partners, you and your kids and family. And that's where the real change happens. And that concept of hyperlocality, of really understanding what's going on in the context of someone's life, that's how we make the big change. So we can come in with these big principles, but ultimately it's you, and I need to understand, where you're going to put this in and what your resources are. And anytime we can move something into the household, like a shower that gets hot and cold, or massage, or some kind of thing where you don't have to go out, we see that adherence goes up. We see that compliance goes up, and it becomes manageable. And especially in those people who are working really hard, I want you to have your castle set up to the extent that you can, so that you don't have to make another decision or go to another place. And if it's easy for you to step out and get hot, cool, you'll do it. And if you have to walk across the street, the chances of you doing drop to zero.
Right. Which beautifully segues into the next thing I wanted to ask you about selfishly, which is I'm in the process of building a home gym right now.
We're in.
We got like a 40-foot shipping container that we're customizing with a deck out front and stuff like that. So it's going to take a couple months. We're in the middle of the build right now, and I haven't acquired any kind of equipment for it yet. So obviously, you two are the best people to ask. Like, what are the things that I should get? What should I avoid? Like, so 40 foot, it's big. It's pretty big.
Oh yeah,
but it's not like unlimited space. Like I have like a indoor bike trainer, and I've got a hydro rowing machine.
Great.
So I have those two things, but then what kind of weight equipment should I be getting? What should I be looking at? What are the essentials? Quick
backstory. Did you know our first gym was a shipping container?
No, I didn't know that.
So we actually started San Francisco CrossFit in 2005. And because real estate was so expensive in San Francisco and CrossFit was so emergent, and we actually weren't starting it to be a business. We were just starting it because we were like, hey, this CrossFit thing is fun. And, and Kelly had a full-time physical therapy job. I had a big law firm job. So this was a complete side hustle for us. And so we actually had the idea to get a shipping container and put all of our equipment inside the shipping container. And then we got this awning. It was like awning. Is awning the right word
canopy.
For it? Mm-hmm. This canopy.
Right.
And
you could say tent if you're disrespecting us.
We were outside. Our entire gym was outside for 7 years, from 2005 till 2012. And our members, we had 350 members, and our members would come and work out outside in the rain or shine. And eventually we moved inside into a cool building in the Presidio. But we've been laughing during the pandemic because everyone's like, look at this thing I'm doing, outdoor gym. And we were like, hey, we were the first, we invented the outdoor gym. And we saw all the positives and negatives of having an outdoor gym when there's any kind of weather. But
I would say that the main thing that people sort of think is my gym at home needs to look like a college strength and conditioning platform. No. I need all think about the
old school,
the programs at Stanford. You walk in there and you're like, whoa, this is an impressive gym. Maybe you need a squat rack, maybe, because that's convenient. But those could be squat stands. So really, I think it comes back to you have a couple monostructural pieces of cardio equipment, which you love, that you're going to do because it's easy to get intervals in when you're compressed for time. Otherwise, go out, right? Dumbbells, kettlebells, maybe one barbell for pressing overhead. I think overhead, we could come into this and say, well, what are the fundamental positions and shapes we should train, especially as a person who's not 20s trying to win world championships anymore. I am a huge fan of deadlifting with a hex bar, right? A trap bar deadlift, because we can really get control and we can put the tissues into good shapes. But it really is a lot simpler. Having medicine balls, having
that's what I was
things to pick up and carry, those where I'd put all my energy. Like I am not, I have such a bad wrist from paddling all those years and broken that I can't handle a regular barbell anymore. I have to use a sort of a neutral grip, but I can handle all the sandbags. And really, how do we make you durable in a short amount of time what's the minimum effective play dose so that you can go out and do what you want to do? And then what is it your family likes to do? What's their input? And leaving it as open as possible is the game, because it is easy to be like, oh, this is so fun. Let me go to Rogue and
there's a couple things. I mean, there's a couple things I would add. Sounds like you have a bike, but I would really recommend getting an assault bike or some kind of bike with arms if you don't know how. And there's two reasons for that. Number one, because it seems like you do like to go hard in the paint. You really can go hard in the paint on an assault bike. But number two, in the event that anyone in your household ever faces an injury or a surgery, that is the single piece of equipment we recommend people get because you can do it with 3 limbs.
Yeah, no impact.
No impact. So the amount of people that we've put on with a cast, a knee surgery, a brace on that thing and done 3-limbed biking is all the people. And in fact, in all of our surgery recovery protocols, that's one piece of equipment we recommend everybody get because, just for your psychological health, getting injured and going through a surgery and not being able to move your body. And that's like the first thing you can always do is 3-limbed anything on that bike. So to me, that's like one of the greatest investments you can have if you can invest in a gym.
And what I would say is, as you are an experienced mover, you have this ability to go out in the world and do those things. I want you to spend your tissue tolerance credits on actual sports. So do I care that you can full snatch? No, I don't. But I care that you can muscle snatch a dumbbell, right? And from a hang position. And what we'll see is that a lot of the training decisions I think make sense for people like my age, I'm 50 this year, is I want high physiology, low skill. Where I can get all the bang for the buck and then go stand-up paddle or go ride my mountain bike or spend my Achilles credits running the hills instead of smoking myself with exercises in the gym.
Yeah. That's certainly my, attitude.
High physiology.
Like, I'm not trying to completely wreck myself. I just want to be sturdy, stable, mobile, flexible, functional, pain-free, so I can go and do all the other things that I enjoy and, basically work on maintaining that to the best of my ability for as long as possible.
I think you could do you could get a barbell if that's something that if you like to do barbell work, but I think you could get all the stimulus you want with some dumbbells, some kettlebells, a couple of heavy balls, a few sandbags. I mean, the amount of things that you can do with just those things are infinite. And to me, you can get so much bang for your buck with that. So, I mean, if you like to do barbell training, then I would get a squat rack and a couple, couple pounds of weights.
Don't go crazy
on those things. But
recently, one of our friends was like, they're building their gym out. And they're like, "What do you think of this?" I'm like, "I'm not sure you need a competition bench. Like that seems a little excessive. Like you can floor press just fine."
But if you just have a rack where you can and a bench or whatever where you can do all the multiple things.
And they swing out. Right? You can get them so they tuck away.
And then it's a pull-up bar too. You can make your rack a pull-up bar, so that's a bonus.
On that subject of like making, movement a priority in the home, the obvious kind of next thing that I want to talk to you guys about is, parenting and how you instill a passion for movement and in young people, right? Like it reminds me of Peter Attia talking about watching his kids when they were young and realizing that kids are naturally geniuses at movement. Like they're able to do things that now, we wish we could do. So we are all built to move, the title of your book, right? And children know exactly what to do. And somewhere along the line, we lose that touch, that connectivity, that capacity to move like a supple leopard, right? So like, how do you guys think about this and practice it in your own home and talk about it with respect to young people?
I think the way we've approached parenting in every respect is trying to sort of do as we do, not do as we say. And so we've always had a home gym. And I think that is such an important part of teaching our kids how much we love movement and how much we value movement. And, and I also have a group of ladies who comes over and works out at my house 3 or 4 times a week. And, as we said, we have peg boards and pull-up bars and balance boards and, double Dutch ropes around the house.
You want to set a lot of traps for your kids.
Yeah, we've just tried to set a lot of traps and show them that, movement is a priority for us. One of the things I've seen now that I'm in my late 40s is that the friends of mine who didn't grow up moving in some way are the ones that have really struggled to figure out how to fit exercise into their life now as adults. And so one of the things I really wanted and was sort of intentional about, and I think both of us was that I was like, when my daughters leave the home, I want them to want to move on their own, to be motivated on their own, to keep moving their body because they've learned how much better they feel if they just keep moving. Mm-hmm. And, we like to tell a story way back when our daughter Georgia was like 9, we had occasion to do all this genetic testing on the whole family. We did all this genetic testing on all of us.
Sorry, kids.
And I know. And it turned out that Georgia had a low genetic drive to move, our daughter Georgia. And Georgia does...
There's a genetic marker for that?
There's a genetic marker on desire to move.
Wow.
And so Georgia has a low genetic drive to move, and that's actually obvious. She loves to bake, and left to her own devices, she probably would bake and watch
TV. She even created
and,
a subscription cookie company.
She has a subscription cookie company, but when we got that piece of information, we realized, hey, this is a kid who might need to be pushed a little bit more to move because she's not going to naturally get off the couch and start moving. And so we definitely made sure that, she was involved in some kind of sport or activity. I think the other key thing we did is that we made movement. Our kids were allowed to choose what type of movement they wanted to do, but not whether or not to do movement. Mm-hmm. And, that's one of the ways I think we found ourselves to be like the strictest parents. Like we give our kids choice, but it's within these very clear sort of parameters. And that movement was one of them. Movement was not, whether or not they moved was not a choice, and how they wanted to move. Sky's the limit. We wanted to give our kids the opportunity to try anything they wanted, because I'm really a true believer that if you find a type of movement that you like and enjoy and that's fun for you, then you will do it, and probably for your entire life. And so my goal was to see my daughter Georgia go off to college, which she's going to do this year, and know that on her own accord, without any outside motivation, she was going to know that if she kept moving, that she would feel better and do better in school and have better, more connected relationships and feel good in her body and be able to do things she wants to do. And it's so interesting to see that, we didn't really see that click individually for her until about 2 years ago when she was 15 or 16. And now the kid who, when she was younger, would bake and then go sit on the couch and watch movies, now bakes and then goes out to our home gym and deadlifts.
So what was I'm interested in how that tipped from one to the other, because similar situation, some not frustrations, but queries or challenges around like how to instill or inspire movement in young teenagers that aren't interested in listening to their parents. Or
yes,
an expert is someone who lives a mile away.
Yeah. And it's not like I'm not the example.
No,
I'm like
out
doing it every
You're
day, and my wife
example.
is doing it in her own way. Like we are modeling that, and yet it's not connecting.
It's not connecting
necessarily.
I think one of the solutions is when our daughters are exercising with their friends, they're in an environment where there's a team doing it, that reduces a lot of the drag. I'm like, let's go front squat and do sprints. And my daughter's like, that's so boring. But, it lights me up. I have this insane desire to move. Gamifying it, putting in a class setting. Those are the ways when we have, you two at this end of the table, you can live a life of austerity and put in the work and grind for its own satisfaction. But that's not a lot of the reason that especially young people love to do it. They like to relate. Yes, it's very cool that Georgia now can go back squat. And as an aside, she's in a little bit of a power struggle with our school right now, who has a great weight room, because the coach there wants her to do this foundations work. And she's like, no, I don't need to do that foundations work. I just want to come in and squat.
Do you know who my parents are? Don't I get a pass on that?
Yeah, she really wants to get a pass, but
she's like, what do I need to do? Power snatch? Like, what do you need?
Anton is not giving her a pass.
Anton, this is for you. So, one of the things I've learned, that's the best. I've learned working with this women's water polo team is that the women like to do things together differently than boys or men. I'll do it on my own, right? And so thinking differently about that solution, putting our daughters into environments with their friends. That really made a big difference.
Right.
And creating a social structure around it really made a big difference. And I would say also, what are we talking about? How fit do your 14-year-old need to be? When we talk about shaping the environment, one of the things that Juliet and I figured out early on when our kids were in elementary school was we created a walking school bus. And we realized that we lived within a mile and a half of the school. And we do this thing where I'd work the drop-off lane. And if you've ever had a kid, you work the drop-off lane.
It's like the most depressing place on earth, the drop-off lane.
Open the door, you hear the hate and the stress of each family roils out.
And then you absorb it.
I love you.
You absorb it as the parent volunteer that's opened the door. And it's like the worst experience.
It's the worst. So what I said was, maybe we don't have to do that ever again. We could just walk our kids. Juliet created this walking school bus. But that was a great example of making it so that we all walked as a family. And that wasn't one more thing we had to do. Like at the end of the day, your dad's trumping in being like, let's go exercise. Like that was, I made my kids cry a lot.
Yeah.
Like teaching them to Olympic lift.
Yeah. Like quick side story. I said, Kelly's been really worried our whole kid's life about being like that dad at sporting events. And so, but the problem is in my view, the pendulum swung too far. And at one point I said to Kelly, I was like, hey, so our kids should at least get some benefit from the fact that they're Kelly Starrett's kids. Like you don't ever coach them because he's so worried about being that dad.
Yeah.
And so I said, I was like, you've got to start weightlifting with our daughter, Caroline. Like you've got to start weightlifting. And of course she was very resistant to it, not excited. And there were 3 occasions where she came in from the side yard and was crying, and she was
Best
like,
coach in the world.
Dad was mean. And so
look at your foot pressure, kid.
So anyway, that's when I realized we needed to outsource. And so we actually started sending her to this Olympic lifting club, and she on her own with a group of other kids actually really learned how to like weightlifting and learned the fundamental skills with these great coaches. And, we took ourselves out of the equation there. And so, we're definitely fans of outsourcing.
Yeah, it's interesting how that works. Like they just, it can't be the parent.
It can't be the parent.
It can't. And like, I'm thinking of, I had Jodison on here and he's talking about his parent. And I was like, this dude is insane. Like,
oh my, we just had him on our podcast.
Waking his kids up at 4 a.m. and
oh my God.
Like, trudge up a mountain before they can open up their Christmas
Quitter's
presents.
Court.
Quitter's office is closed.
The Quitter's office. Did you tell you about the Quitter's office?
No, but I can imagine.
I think one of the things that, my daughters were gifted because their mother is a world champion and a sufferer. And you get your mitochondria from your mom. So children, you're welcome. 3-time world champion, superstar. We, as a family, like to go into the woods and wilderness. We love to run rivers and be active outside, and pulling our kids into that forces us to do those things. And so, making your kids uncomfortable because you do this as a family is a really great way to do it. And if for some families who are saying, hey, I want to struggle or I struggle with this, let's go for a walk after dinner for 10 minutes. That's what our family does. And it could be a simple beginning a conversation of doing that together. And again, I think we're going to culturally have to wrap our heads around what is it to be a human being and a member of society. How do we do a better job supporting coaches? How do we put PE back in school? It's a big multi-layer problem. What you can do is start to control some of this in home just through activity, and theoretically, again, give your kids all the opportunities to do as many different sports and as diverse experiences. Yeah. And then when they start to get older, you can specialize.
And I just want to make very clear, we have met a massive amount of resistance. You are not alone.
Interesting.
And in Georgia's case, it did seem like it was more of a maturity thing. Like she turned, 16 plus 17. And that was when
she liked being jacked.
Yeah, there was kind of a shift. I think she saw the difference in her body composition if she excised. Like I think she probably had some external motivation from just like wanting to look a certain way.
She had the hardest shot in the league on water polo. And people were like, where did she learn to throw so hard? I'm like, muscle snatch.
But I mean, getting our 14-year-old daughter, who probably will be a Division I water polo goalie, who is extremely athletic and
5'10".
a gifted athlete. But I mean, getting her to like leave TikTok in her bedroom is a serious challenge.
Right.
So what we started doing recently is in between all of the training, we just do little micro sessions. We just keep it. It's like 20 minutes. We're just going to do one movement. That's going to be enough. Really, the idea of never do nothing. Like there's always things you can do in your house together. And Caroline, who is crazy and awesome. She was like, hey, can we throw knives out here too? And I was like, you bet. So front squats and knives. She loves to throw
we have
knives.
Like a knife throwing setup now in our side yard.
So now she's like, hey, I fetch the knives. I'm like, you want to go throw knives? She's like, yeah. And I'm like, why don't we press in between? I think that's really reasonable. So making it about music, making it the most enjoyable experience possible. Anytime you're doing any sport activity with your kids. I mean, we used to, with Caroline, we'd go hiking. We loved to hike. And we invented these things called emo bears. And they're gummy bears. And when our daughter started getting emo and all glummy, I'd whip out the emo bear and boom, she'd be back. I was like, hey, how about a couple of gummy bears? So, I think you have to do high manipulation to learn to like to exercise and train and be in that training environment. That's a learned experience.
And I do think keeping it playful and fun. I mean, we went through Kelly will get mad that I describe it this way, but like a bow and arrow phase. Right? Well, how did I say?
You go right ahead.
We went through a bow and arrow phase. So we have all these targets at our house and, so kids can go in the backyard and do that. And, we just, anything that they're willing to do that seems fun to them, like we're game, like we're in, if they want some cool device, we're like, yes, we're in. The other thing, and this is, the most inaccessible sport for most people, but I mean, one of the most fun things we've done with our kids is ski, because, nobody's on their phones, you're on the chairlift,
Right.
you have a ton of time to connect, we're outside. So we've had a ton of fun doing that with our kids too.
But it's starting to
very
catch.
inaccessible, but
I think you don't ever
fun.
get to take your foot off the gas. I think that's really, and if we use this allegory we've been talking about, like scaling from children all the way up to the Olympics, think about how hard it is for adults to develop the practice and love to suffer and be uncomfortable. It takes a minute to do that and to change those behaviors. So you just have to put it in front of your kids in microdoses for a decade plus. That's how long it's going to take, I think.
Yeah, and our dear friend TJ gave us this. He told us this story, and his kids were in high school at the time, and our kids were in middle school. But he said, one of the things he'd noticed with parenting is that if you think of parenting like a marathon, he noticed that a lot of parents stop running the marathon at like mile 24 when their kids are like 15. Like they sort of give up.
Pull the hamstring and you go on without me.
Yeah, the foot comes off the gas because
they're pretty much baked.
Yeah, they're pretty much baked. They're pretty independent. And his point of view was like, well, actually, that's when you need to put your foot on the gas. Like that's when they're the most mature, the most, most able to, absorb information. They pretend like they don't, but they need the most support, and then that's actually the time to sort of put your foot on the gas as far as parenting. And so that really had an impact on us. And so I think we've been trying to, make sure in our own way that, we're going to run across the finish line of the marathon and really be present and kind of stay on them when they're in high school.
George is a senior. She's last year was looking at colleges and doesn't want to play in college, understands and recognizes that collegiate athletics is professional athletics. And just like, that's not for me. But one of the things she graded every university checked on was the weight room and training facilities. And I was like, it's perfect. And she was super bummed that sometimes she's like,
daddy's girl.
Yeah, Kelly was so proud. Like we had these, like we went on this Midwestern tour and she created these spreadsheets and it was like, overall campus feel, gym. And she actually really loved the University of Indiana. And it's like one of the most beautiful campuses I've ever seen. It's like Hogwarts. And we went into the gym and she's like, nope. She's like, no, wait, I'm out. Peace out.
Wow.
And literally that
why
was
are the
like,
kettlebells so far from the rowing machine? She was really confused.
And she, she said, and the other thing she noticed is she said, there's no women in the weight room at this college gym in Indiana. She's like, I'm out. So
Olympic lifting and powerlifting were the original amateur sports because they really could, with just a York barbell set, you could train yourself in your basement. And if we can get back to some of those basic competencies and exposure of kids to these things, you don't have to be a weightlifter, but I want you to be able to be comfortable with that.
Well, on that subject, I'm sure you've put quite a bit of thought into how you would revamp PE, physical education in the school system. Like it's a disaster. When I grew up, it was the president's physical fitness test and dodgeball and what have you. But in terms of something that needs an upgrade, I mean, this is certainly, primed for that, given the fact that childhood obesity rates are through the roof and through devices, et cetera. Young people are more sedentary and less engaged with physical activity than perhaps they have ever been. So, we need to solve this problem.
And I don't think maybe you both have like such genetic drives to move and cope, but if you'd given me all this
I love
tech,
how
I'm
you've
sure.
like bucketed
Yeah.
Rich and I into this like suffer lawyer category.
I know, exactly.
He's just put us over here in this like suffer lawyer.
We're
Over here.
we're just one unit.
You're like, we're
over
just
here.
one unit, and then there's
in his
him.
mind, we represent like one thing. Yeah, it's okay.
Multidimensional sufferness. What you really just brought up was sort of two things. One is, how can we reconfigure what we're doing during the school day where kids are mandated to be there? It's a government activity. What does that look like so we can get more movement in, right? And that may mean we need to give kids 3 meals a day there, or they can take a snack home. They can have access to good food there for their first time. Of course, that's tricky. If we just started something like the Daily Mile, which they started in the UK, just kids have to walk a mile a day, right? Just during that time, what teacher can't administer a walking mile? Every kid has to walk a mile. We started our kids we did a Google Talk in 2010 about looking at the workforce. And then we realized that we were not applying our lessons to our children. And we went into our local elementary school and said, what do you think about this radical idea of creating a different kind of classroom where kids could move more? They could stand, they could fidget, they could sit on the ground, we could give them more movement choice. And our principal was like, yes, let's do it. And then in the next course of a year, we flipped the entire school, became the first all-moving school in the world. So kids had all this agency and choice, and the desk was individually hired for them. So we didn't have to program in a specific program. We just made it so that there was more movement in the day. And so there's that one piece of what happens if you couldn't drop your kid off, or you had to drop your kid off to a walking place or something like that. How could you get more movement in? Because I think we need to do that.
Yeah. And
then simultaneously redefining PE as not this horror show of, the flexed arm hang tests where we do kids who don't move or don't have any families that move. How can we start to use that time to explore dance, yoga, weightlifting? And what movements do we think that every child should know how to do in order to progress? What movement skills? And so it becomes a skill base, just like reading or math or anything else. We could do the same thing with that. And there's a real opportunity for that. I think there's a real hunger and awareness, because I think parents are like, holy crap, we're behind. No parent wants their child to be unhealthy.
And, I do think there's a lot of separate from PE things that could be done. I mean, one of the things that drives me insane, and I went to like 500 PTA meetings, and now my kids are in elementary school, but our elementary school was set up so that on rainy days, the kids would stay inside at recess and watch movies. And I was like, that is the craziest thing I've ever heard. Like, I mean, I grew up in a snowy climate, and we actually would put on our snow gear and go outside and play. So the notion that kids have to sit inside and watch movies when it's raining, and that it's, they're not going to get a cold, they're not going to get sick, and kids actually love to play outside in the rain. So that was a battle I tried to fight and lost. But I mean, to me, that's just one of those simple things that it's like, kids can go outside in cold weather, and kids can go outside in the rain, and they need to move their bodies, and they need to play. The other thing is that something like 90% of kids live within 1.5 miles of their own elementary school. And, when we were kids, it was like 75% of kids biked or walked to school. And now it's like 15%. We've just had this huge drop. Schools have rebuilt themselves around the whole concept of the drop-off lane that we talked about before. And so, I mean, yes, the PE programs need to be massively revamped, but I also think there's all this sort of connected stuff. How do we make sure kids can move more in the classroom? How do we build in things like the Daily Mile? How do we make sure little kids are getting all the time they need to play outside at school? How do we facilitate environments where kids can walk and bike to school safely? And I think even that would make a huge difference, because, tackling the specific PE problem is such a huge one. It makes me feel tired to think about it. But I mean,
you don't
agree.
You don't have to solve the problem for the school district. You have to solve the problem for your classroom. So you have a child in a classroom, you can improve that classroom. The teacher is the functional unit of that. And there's all of those things. And if your teacher can teach math and skills and social studies, they can teach squatting. And there are tons of resources available. What we're going to have to do is think differently about the problem, because clearly, who owns this? That's the issue. No one wants to own it.
Yeah, well, it's a grassroots problem in the classroom with the teacher and the students in that particular classroom, and it's a federal program issue that scales all the way up to the White House. So the question is there political will for this? Like, I remember when Michelle Obama was the first lady, and there was initiatives around moving and like eating healthy, and that did not go well. And it's like insane.
Do you remember
right?
Jamie Oliver was like run out of the country? Right?
I mean,
pizza is not
so
a vegetable.
It's like, how dare anybody come in and try to like improve, the health and welfare of young people? Like, I think the last time physical fitness in the public school system was a thing was when Arnold Schwarzenegger was talking about it, right? Like, I don't know what the current state of it is now, but I know it's decrepit in comparison to what it could be, and there's certainly a need. But there's so much bureaucratic red tape. All you can do is, like you said, Kelly, is get involved in, your kid's classroom and try to begin there.
There is the other thing is to say, okay, this high school, middle school, elementary school problem is beyond my skill. But then there is this kind of irregular army of youth sports. So the youth sport coach becomes even more important because this may be the only time where kids learn to move and play.
That's a good point.
And the data is pretty good that a lot of kids actually do engage in small sports. And it's not everywhere and it's not equal for sure. But the data is that kids are starting to play so that we now can think, well, how can we support the coaches? Because that may be the only place where kids are getting any actual coaching. It's not about basketball. It's how do I self-regulate and how do I calm down and what does movement skills look like? So we have to, I think, be clever enough to look at some other opportunities to support. And right now, there's Positive Coaching Alliance and some of these things, but who teaches volunteer coaches how to coach kids? It doesn't happen.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of, as we were talking about before, where, your kids often don't want to hear the message from you, but they can better hear it from other people in their lives. And oftentimes that could be a coach. And so if youth coaches did get into the game of a little bit of like, teaching kids how to take care of their tissues and, telling kids they do need to sleep and maybe get off their phones, like that would be such a support for, I think, all of us parents who are trying really hard within our own homes. Sometimes that outside voice is really what kids need to hear to actually try to make change. And so
they can't hear it from their parents.
No, they can't hear it from their parents. No. But man, if we had our youth coaches out there saying, hey, you guys really need to put your phone down and get 8 hours of sleep if you want to perform well on the soccer game tomorrow. And hey, you guys should probably eat a few vegetables. And hey, here's this $2 foam roller. Like if your calves are sore, you can do some input. I mean, that alone would make a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. Right. But how dare you,
How dare you volunteer coaches?
It's tricky.
It's really complicated.
It shouldn't be, but it is, right?
And, we'll let you know how the experiment goes, when our kids.
Well, also, on the subject of like the White House and stuff like that, is it correct that you have worked with the president? Is this true?
That's correct.
That's correct.
Like, can you is this like
two presidents?
Sign an NDA on this? Like, what is it? What are we talking about here?
We have a friend who is the physical therapist and coach to President Obama and also to President Biden. And he is a good friend of ours and says, hey, we need help with resources, or do you have ideas for this, or how do we solve this problem? And I think we can say now, because he's just a citizen, but one of the strangest experiences we had is making an air-gapped computer full of mobility drills and things where I talked directly to President Obama. That was very uncomfortable for me. But
And little strategies, like we're obviously huge fans of standing desks, but Obama was writing his next book and he finds that he can concentrate the most and the best when he is sitting. And so he also was uncomfortable and couldn't figure out a good sitting setup. So we consulted with him on, okay, here's sort of a sitting desk setup where you can still manage to get some movement in and, fidget and be able to keep your brain alive, but actually be in a sitting position. I mean, it's really like minor stuff like that, but that makes a difference in the end.
It's pretty cool.
How do we keep weight on an aging executive? I mean, these are the real questions. How do we,
aging executive,
whoever is doing this job, how can we support them so that they can do the job the best? That's really.
And we have put our name in the hat, although no one's come a calling, but our name is in the hat to be on the President's Physical Fitness Council, which
that's a no-brainer.
We would love to do that. I mean, that would really be like, an amazing thing. And we think we have something to contribute, but no one's come a calling. So
well, I'm setting you up for that layup, and on the subject of keeping President Obama on the basketball court, right?
Yeah.
Well, yes, that's very true. This is a great allegory for everything we're talking about. President Obama is a great athlete and very competitive. He's said as much. And one of the things that was happening was he would play basketball at the White House, and he was ruining a lot of cabinet members and staff members. They were having catastrophic injuries. The most dangerous sport for a middle-aged person.
Burning out his whole staff.
He was burning out his staff. They were like tearing their ACLs.
Quad ligament
Blowing out
tears,
their
Achilles. The most dangerous sport for middle-aged people is basketball. Because you go from zero
Fast
to
lateral.
sprinting,
to
lateral
cutting,
movement,
cutting.
don't have the tissues. You haven't exposed yourself to. When's the last time you jumped rope, much less cut?
Well, I think it's now been surpassed by pickleball, though.
That's true.
I don't know if we have the perfect data on that, but we think.
But I think that's the allegory for how can you be prepared to come off the couch and theoretically come out intact and have more fun. Especially when the
game ready.
When the president asks you to play basketball, will you be ready?
Yeah.
That's what I want.
Yeah. And without having to sacrifice your ACL. Right? This was super fun, you guys. I really appreciate your time. I'm a huge fan of the work that you're doing. I think it's really important.
Thank you so much.
And the new book, Built to Move, it's got, like we talked about, the 10 chapters, which kind of goes through seriatim, all of these practices that are very easily incorporated into our lives, and obviously, super important to keep us moving and stable and mobile and flexible and all the good stuff. And I might just start practicing.
Can't wait to see.
Can't-
Do you
can't
have any
issue.
blind
Can't wait to
spots?
see. Yeah, let us know if you have any blind spots, and we're
I
really
have so
grateful
many
to have
blind spots.
to have.
That's a whole other podcast, Juliet, but we'll get to it.
Let's do it.
Yeah, we can. Then you and I can sit down and have a sufferfest / recovering lawyer, retired lawyer
Yes.
conversation as well.
I look forward to that. Thank you so much for having us. It was
yeah.
really fun to chat.
Really, really, really cool. So if people want to check you out, obviously pick up the book, Built to Move, but thereadystate.com. You've got tons of materials and programs there. Your YouTube channel, The Ready State as well. A million videos and on Instagram.
Yep.
Anywhere else you want to direct people?
That's it. Those are the two things. BuiltToMove.com.
All right. Thanks, you guys.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Until next time. Peace. Lance.